Kindness will always triumph over cruelty. That's what my foster mother whispered. I didn't believe it when the Alpha's daughters ripped my dress at the Luna selection to humiliate me in front of everyone. Until the Alpha himself took off his cloak, wrapped it around me, and claimed me as his. Chapter 1. The Unwanted Shadow. The pre-dawn air in the Silver Crest Pack territory smelled of pine needles and coming rain. Rosanna Friedman pressed her calloused hands against the cold marble floor of the Alpha's mansion, scrubbing in circles that had become as natural as breathing. Her knees ached. They always ached these days. 17 years of kneeling will do that to a body. You missed a spot. Rosanna didn't need to look up to know who stood above her. Alicia Wheeler's voice carried the particular melody of someone who'd never been told no in her entire life. The Alpha's eldest daughter, golden-haired, wolf-blessed and cruel in the way that only the truly secure can afford to be. Right there, a perfectly manicured nail pointed to a section of floor that gleamed as spotlessly as every other inch. I can see the grime. Honestly, Rosanna, if you can't even clean properly, what use are you? Rosanna bit the inside of her cheek and scrubbed the imaginary spot. The metallic taste of blood bloomed in her mouth. She'd learned long ago that arguing only made things worse in the hierarchy of the Silver Crest Pack. She existed somewhere below the Omega Wolves and just above the furniture, an orphan, wolfless, taken in by Alpha Douglas Bray out of what he called charitable obligation after her parents died in a rogue attack when she was 5. Charity. That's what he called it when he handed her a bucket and rags on her 8th birthday instead of cake. Mother wants you in her chambers immediately after you finish here, Alicia continued. Examining her reflection in an ornate hallway mirror, she turned slightly, admiring the way the early morning light caught the silver threads in her dress. The Luna selection is in 3 days. 3 days, Rosanna. Can you even imagine? Rosanna wouldn't. The Luna selection happened once every decade, a gathering of unmated she-wolves from every pack in the Northern Territories, all competing for the chance to become the chosen mate of Alpha King Cameron Livingston, the most powerful werewolf in 6 generations. They said he could shift into his wolf form in the space of a heartbeat. They said he'd killed a rogue army of 50 wolves single-handedly when he was only 19. They said he was looking for a Luna worthy of standing beside him as he united the fractured packs under one banner. They said a lot of things about Cameron Livingston. None of them involved orphaned, wolfless girls who scrubbed floors. I can't imagine, Rosanna said quietly, which was the truth. Alicia's laugh was like breaking glass. Of course you can't. The selection is for she-wolves with breeding, with power, with worth, not. She waved a dismissive hand. Whatever you are. The words hit exactly where Alicia intended. Rosanna had heard variations of this speech her entire life, but it never quite stopped stinging. She was different. Wrong. At 17, she should have experienced her first shift years ago. Should have felt her wolf stir beneath her skin. Should have become a full member of the pack. Instead, she remained stubbornly, inexplicably human, while every other teenager around her transformed and claimed their place in the hierarchy. I'll finish here and go to Luna Patricia immediately, Rosanna said, keeping her voice level. Luna Patricia, Alicia corrected sharply. You will address my mother by her proper title. Just because she lets you live under our roof doesn't mean you've earned familiarity. Of course. My apologies, Luna. Patricia. Alicia swept away in a cloud of expensive perfume, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Rosanna waited until the sound faded completely before she sat back on her heels and pressed her forehead against her raised knees. Just a moment. She'd allow herself just one moment of weakness before she had to face whatever new torment Luna Patricia had devised. The mansion around her was coming alive. She could hear the shuffle of Omega wolves beginning their morning routines. The distant clang of pots in the kitchen, the low murmur of Alpha Douglas's voice from his study. The Silver Crest Pack was one of the largest in the Northern Territories, over 300 wolves strong, and their alpha's home reflected that power. Marble floors imported from the southern quarries, chandeliers that dripped crystal-like frozen waterfalls, tapestries depicting the pack's glorious history stretching back 12 generations. Rosanna had cleaned every inch of it. She forced herself to her feet, ignoring the protest of her knees, and gathered her cleaning supplies. The bucket of now gray water slushed as she carried it toward the servants' quarters. She'd dump it, rinse the bucket, and present herself to Luna Patricia with her head appropriately bowed and her expectations appropriately lowered. This was her life. This had always been her life. The servants' wing existed in a different world than the main mansion. The floors were plain wood instead of marble. The walls were bare instead of decorated. The she-wolves who worked here, mostly omegas, and a handful of humans from the nearby town who'd been hired for cooking and cleaning, moved with the efficient grace of people who knew their place and accepted it. Rosanna Colleen Chase, the head cook, caught her arm as she passed the kitchen entrance. The older woman's face was lined with the kind of worry that had become permanent over the years. Whatever Patricia wants, just agree to it. Don't argue. Don't explain. Just bow your head and say, "Yes, Luna. What does she want?" Colleen's grip tightened, the selection. She's been in a mood about it all week. Both her daughters are going Alicia and Celeste, and she's determined they'll catch the Alpha King's eye. You know how she gets when she's focused on something. Rosanna knew. Luna Patricia Bray Costa had married Alpha Douglas 20 years ago in a strategic alliance that had strengthened both their packs. She was beautiful in the way that predators are beautiful, all sharp edges and calculating eyes. She'd never wanted Rosanna in her home, had made that clear from the beginning, but Alpha Douglas had insisted. His one act of genuine kindness, or perhaps just stubbornness, Patricia had made Rosanna pay for that kindness every day since. "I'll be careful," Rosanna promised. Colleen released her arm but didn't look convinced. "You always are. Doesn't seem to help much, does it?" No, it didn't. Luna Patricia's private chambers occupied the entire eastern wing of the mansion's second floor. Rosanna climbed the servant staircase. She wasn't allowed to use the main stairs and emerged into a hallway lined with portraits of Silver Crest Alpha's past. They all had the same hard eyes, the same expression of absolute certainty in their own supremacy. The door to Patricia's sitting room stood open. Rosanna knocked softly on the frame. "Enter." Patricia sat at her vanity, and even from behind, Rosanna could see the tension in her shoulders. The Luna was still beautiful at 42, her blonde hair showing only hints of silver. Her figure maintained through rigorous training and careful diet. She didn't turn as Rosanna entered. "You took your time. My apologies, Luna. I came as quickly as I could. Not quickly enough." Patricia's eyes met Rosanna's in the mirror, cold assessing. "The Luna selection begins in 3 days. My daughters will be attending as representatives of the Silver Crest Pack. This is the opportunity of their lives, Rosanna. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "Yes, Luna. I don't think you do." Patricia stood and turned, her silk dressing gown whispering against the floor. "Cameron Livingston will choose his mate from among the gathered shoals. Whichever pack he selects from will gain immeasurable power and influence. If he chooses Alicia or Celeste, the Silver Crest Pack becomes the most important pack in the Northern Territories. Everything I've worked for, everything I've built comes down to the next 3 days." Rosanna stayed silent. She'd learned that Patricia's speeches rarely required actual responses. "Which brings me to you." Patricia circled closer, her movements predatory. "You've been a thorn in my side since the day Douglas brought you into this house. A charity case, a burden, a constant reminder that my husband has a weakness for strays. But I've tolerated you because Douglas insisted, and because you at least make yourself useful with menial labor." The air in the room felt too thick. Rosanna focused on breathing. The selection is being held at the Royal Pax territory, a 3-day journey from here. My daughters will need someone to attend to their needs, someone to carry their luggage, prepare their clothing, arrange their hair, ensure they look absolutely perfect when they're presented to the Alpha King. Someone whose sole purpose is to make them shine. Understanding hit like a physical blow. You want me to go with them? I want you to serve them, Patricia corrected. This isn't a vacation, girl. You'll be working every moment. You'll sleep in the servants' quarters. You'll eat after everyone else. You'll make yourself invisible unless needed. And if you do anything to embarrass my daughters or this pack, I will make the rest of your miserable little life so painful you'll beg me to send you away. Rosanna should have felt fear. She did feel fear. But underneath it, buried so deep she almost didn't recognize it, was something else. Something that felt dangerously like hope. 3 days away from this mansion. 3 days in the Royal Pax territory where she'd never been. 3 days of something, anything different from the endless routine of scrubbing floors and swallowing humiliation. I understand, Luna, Rosanna said. I'll serve your daughters to the best of my ability. Patricia's eyes narrowed. See that you do. We leave tomorrow at dawn. Pack only what you absolutely need. You won't have room for luxuries. And Rosanna, remember your place. You're going as a servant, nothing more. Don't get any foolish ideas about the selection being for you. Girls like you don't get fairy tale endings. Of course not, Luna. Patricia dismissed her with a wave, already turning back to her vanity. Rosanna fled before the Luna could change her mind or add additional restrictions. Her heart hammered as she descended the servant staircase. 3 days. 3 days away from here. She knew it wouldn't be pleasant. Patricia had made certain of that. But even serving Alicia and Celeste in unfamiliar territory beat the soul-crushing sameness of her daily existence in the Silverest mansion. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Alicia and Celeste required new dresses, of course, and their existing wardrobes needed to be assessed and packed. Rosanna spent hours folding silk and satin into traveling trunks, while the Alpha's daughters debated which gowns would best catch the Alpha King's eye. Neither of them acknowledged her presence except to bark orders. Not that one. It makes my hips look wide. Make sure you pack my diamond earrings. No, the ones Mother gave me. Yes, those. If you wrinkle any of these dresses, I'll make sure you regret it. Rosanna nodded and murmured agreement and kept her hands steady even when exhaustion made them shake. This was familiar. This she knew how to navigate. Night fell. The mansion grew quiet. Rosanna returned to her small room in the servants' wing, barely larger than a closet, with a narrow bed and a single window that overlooked the Pax training grounds. She owned almost nothing. A few changes of clothes, all of them worn and faded. A wooden comb her mother had given her days before the rogue attack. One of her only memories of the woman who'd borne her, a small leather journal, where she sometimes wrote her thoughts when the loneliness became too heavy to carry alone. She packed everything in a cloth bag that had seen better years. It took less than 5 minutes. Then she sat on her bed and allowed herself to imagine just for a moment what the Luna selection might be like. She'd heard stories, of course. The Royal Pax's territory was legendary. Vast forests untouched by human development, mountains that scraped the sky. A mansion that made even the Silvercrest Alpha's home look modest. Hundreds of showwolves from dozens of packs all gathered in one place. Music and dancing and ceremonies that dated back centuries. And Cameron Livingston at the center of it all. The Alpha King, the most powerful werewolf alive. Rosanna had never seen him in person. Few had. He rarely left Royal Pack territory, and when he did, it was usually to settle disputes between packs or deal with rogue threats. She knew him only through rumors and third-hand descriptions. Tall, impossibly handsome, cold, ruthless, fair, but unforgiving. a leader who commanded absolute loyalty from his pack, not the kind of wolf who would ever notice a girl like her. Patricia's words echoed in her mind. Girls like you don't get fairy tale endings. No, they didn't. But maybe, just maybe, she could have 3 days of something different. 3 days of seeing a world beyond scrub brushes and cruel words. 3 days of being somewhere her parents' deaths weren't the defining tragedy of her existence. Maybe that would be enough. Rosanna lay back on her bed and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally claimed her. She dreamed of forests and mountains and a pair of eyes the color of molten gold, watching her from the shadows. When she woke the next morning, she couldn't remember the details, only the feeling that something important was about to begin. She had no idea how right she was. Chapter 2. The Journey to Fate. Dawn broke gray and cold over Silver's territory. Rosanna had been awake for hours, double-checking that every item on Alicia and Celeste's packing lists had been loaded into the traveling carriages. Her fingers were numb from the morning chill, but she didn't dare complain. Luna Patricia watched everything with eyes like a hawk, noting every hesitation, every moment of weakness. Is that everything? Alpha Douglas stood beside the lead carriage, his massive frame imposing even in the dim light. At 45, he remained one of the most powerful alphas in the Northern Territories, built like a warrior, with gray threading through his dark hair and scars that told stories of battles won. He'd been kind to Rosanna exactly once in her life, the day he'd brought her to live in his mansion. Since then, kindness had been replaced by distant indifference, as though acknowledging her existence too directly might upset his mate. Yes, Alpha, Rosanna confirmed, bowing her head. Everything the Luna and your daughters requested has been packed. He grunted acknowledgement and turned away. That was the extent of their interaction these days. Rosanna told herself it didn't hurt. She told herself a lot of things. Rosanna. Celestia's voice cut through the morning air like a whip. The Alpha's younger daughter stood in the mansion's entrance, her arms crossed over her chest. At 16, Celeste was nearly as beautiful as her older sister. Same golden hair, same perfect features. But where Alicia's cruelty was calculated, Celeste was impulsive, thoughtless. Perhaps that made it worse. Where's my blue shawl? The cashmere one? I specifically told you to pack it. Rosanna's stomach dropped. I packed it in your second trunk, Lady Celeste. The smaller one with I don't care which trunk. I want it now. It's freezing out here, and I refuse to start this journey uncomfortable. The second trunk was buried under 3 others in the supply carriage. It would take at least 20 minutes to unload, retrieve the shawl, and repack everything. They were supposed to depart in 10 minutes. Of course, Lady Celeste. I'll retrieve it immediately. Rosanna moved toward the supply carriage, but Luna Patricia's voice stopped her. Leave it. We're already behind schedule, and Celeste can survive without a shawl for a few hours. We'll stop for lunch at the Ironwood Pack's border, and you can dig through her things then. But, Mother, enough, Celeste. Get in the carriage. Celeste shot Rosanna a look of pure venom, as though Rosanna had personally conspired with the Luna to deny her the shawl. She flounced toward the main carriage where Alicia already waited, her face a mask of barely contained excitement. Today was the beginning of their fairy tale, the start of the journey that would end with one of them crowned as the Alpha King's chosen Luna. Rosanna climbed into the servant's carriage, a smaller, less ornate vehicle that carried the pack's Omega attendants and supplies. The interior was cramped and cold with hard wooden benches instead of the plush cushions the Alpha family enjoyed. 5 other she-wolves were already seated, 3 Omega servants and 2 of Luna Patricia's personal handmaids. Long journey ahead, one of the handmaids muttered as Rosanna settled onto the bench. The woman was older, probably in her 30s, with tired eyes and hands that bore the calluses of hard labor. 3 days of nothing but trees and terrible roads. You ever been outside Silvercrest territory? No, Rosanna admitted. Never? Well, you're not missing much. One pack territory looks pretty much like another, just trees and wolves who think they're better than you. The carriage lurched forward. Through the small window, Rosanna watched the Silver Crest mansion recede into the distance. The sprawling structure that had been her prison for 12 years grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared behind the treeing. Something in her chest loosened slightly. Not freedom. She'd never be free. Not really, but distance. Separation. A temporary reprieve from the constant weight of Patricia's scrutiny. The first few hours of travel passed in relative silence. The servant's carriage followed the Alpha's carriage along winding forest roads that saw little maintenance. Rosanna braced herself against the bench as they bounced over ruts and rocks. Her body ached from the constant jostling, but she didn't complain. Complaining accomplished nothing. They crossed into neutral territory just before noon, the buffer zones between packlands, where no single Alpha held dominion. These forests were dangerous at night, populated by rogues and predators, but during the day they remained relatively safe. The Royal Pack maintained patrols along the main roads, ensuring safe passage for packs traveling to selection events. "We're stopping," one of the Omega servants announced as the carriage slowed. "Must be the Ironwood border." Patricia mentioned the Ironwood Pack was smaller than Silverest, maybe 100 wolves total, but strategically located along the main trade routes. Their Alpha, a grizzled wolf named Desmond Schmidt, had built his pack's prosperity on hospitality. He maintained several way stations where traveling packs could rest and resupply for reasonable fees. Rosanna climbed out of the carriage, her legs stiff from hours of sitting. The way station was modest but clean, a large timber building with a covered porch and smoke rising from multiple chimneys. The smell of cooking meat made her stomach growl audibly. She'd skipped breakfast in her rush to prepare everything for departure. Rosanna. Alicia materialized beside her, looking frustratingly fresh despite the long journey. "Mother wants you to help us change into our dayed dresses before we eat. We can't meet the Ironwood Alpha looking like we've been traveling. Of course not. Heaven forbid anyone see them as less than perfect." The way station had several private rooms available for high-ranking visitors. Rosanna followed Alicia and Celeste into one of them, lugging their trunk of day dresses behind her. The room was simple but comfortable. 2 beds, a wash basin, a mirror, and a small fireplace where a fire already crackled. The green dress, Alicia decided, examining her reflection critically. "It brings out my eyes and I want my hair down but curled at the ends. Can you manage that, or is it beyond your limited skills?" Rosanna had been styling hair since she was 10 years old. Patricia had insisted her daughters always look immaculate, and that responsibility had fallen to Rosanna along with everything else. "I can manage, Lady Alicia." "Good. Hurry up. I'm starving." The next 30 minutes were a flurry of activity. Rosanna helped both sisters out of their traveling clothes and into fresh dresses, laced corsets, arranged hair, and retrieved jewelry from various trunks. Alicia wanted gold earrings. Celeste wanted silver. Alicia changed her mind. Silver was better, actually. And why hadn't Rosanna suggested it? Celeste decided her first dress choice made her look washed out and demanded a different one. By the time they were satisfied, Rosanna's fingers ached, and her patience had worn thread thin. But both sisters looked beautiful, annoyingly, frustratingly beautiful, and that was what mattered. "You look lovely, my darlings." Luna Patricia appeared in the doorway, already changed into her own fresh gown. She examined her daughters with the same critical eye. She turned on everything. But this time, approval softened her features. "Absolutely lovely. The Alpha King won't be able to resist either of you." "What about me, Mother?" Celeste turned, showing off her dress. "Do you think he'll notice me first?" "I think he'll be fortunate to have either of you as his Luna," Patricia said diplomatically. Then her gaze fell on Rosanna, still wearing her worn traveling clothes, her hair disheveled from the carriage ride. "You look like something the cat dragged in. Clean yourself up before you embarrass us in front of Alpha Desmond. And retrieve Celeste's blue shawl. She'll want it for the evening portion of the journey." "Yes, Luna." Rosanna waited until the three of them left before she allowed herself a moment of weakness. She sank onto the edge of one of the beds, her head in her hands, and breathed. Just breathed. This was only day 1 of the journey. 2 more days of this before they even reached the Royal Pack's territory. Then 3 days of the actual selection where she'd be serving Alicia and Celeste, while dozens of other beautiful, powerful she-wolves competed for the Alpha King's attention. She didn't belong in that world. She knew it. They knew it. The universe itself seemed to know it, which was why it had denied her a wolf when every other teenager in existence shifted successfully. "Get up," she told herself. "Stop feeling sorry for yourself and do your job." She washed her face in the basin, finger-combed her dark hair into something resembling order, and made her way to the way station's common room. The space was larger than she'd expected, with long wooden tables and benches that could probably accommodate 50 wolves comfortably. Right now, it held maybe 20, the Silver Crest traveling party, plus a handful of Ironwood Pack members who were serving food and drink. Rosanna kept to the edges of the room, as was appropriate for her status. Servants ate after everyone else. Once their betters had been satisfied, she watched as Alpha Douglas engaged in conversation with Alpha Desmond, both men discussing territory, disputes, and trade agreements with the casual authority of those who shaped the world around them. Luna Patricia held court at another table, Alicia and Celeste flanking her like beautiful bookends. Here, Colleen appeared beside her with a plate of bread, cheese, and cold meat. The older woman must have convinced the Ironwood cooks to set aside portions for the servants. "Eat quickly before anyone notices. It's going to be a long afternoon." Rosanna accepted the plate gratefully. The food was simple but good, better than the scraps she usually received. "Thank you. Don't mention it. Literally, if Patricia finds out I'm feeding you before she's finished her meal, she'll have both our heads." They ate in companionable silence, standing in the corner like shadows. Rosanna had perfected the art of invisibility over the years. She knew how to stand, so people's eyes slid right past her. How to move so quietly that wolves with supernatural hearing forgot she was there. It was a survival skill honed through necessity. "You ever wonder what it's like?" Colleen asked quietly. "Being one of them, having that much power, that much certainty that the world will bend to accommodate you sometimes," Rosanna admitted, "but wondering doesn't change anything." "No, I suppose it doesn't." The meal stretched for another hour. Alpha Douglas and Alpha Desmond moved on to discussing the Luna selection itself, the spectacle of it, the political implications, the honor of having the Alpha King choose a mate from the Northern Territories instead of the Southern or Eastern packs. "My daughters have as good a chance as any," Douglas said, pride warming his voice. "Alicia has her mother's beauty and sharp mind. Celeste has spirit and determination. Cameron would be fortunate to have either of them." "The Alpha King is notoriously difficult to impress," Desmond replied. "I've heard stories. They say he rejected 12 potential mates last selection because none of them met his standards. He's looking for something specific. Strength, intelligence, loyalty, fire. Beauty alone won't be enough." Douglas's expression hardened. "My daughters have all those qualities and more. I'm sure they do. I'm merely saying the competition will be fierce. I heard the Blackwater Pack is sending their alpha's niece. She killed a rogue alpha single-handedly last winter, and the Storm Ridge Pack's representative won the Northern Territories Combat Championship 3 years running." The conversation continued, but Rosanna had stopped listening. Her mind snagged on Desmond's words. Strength, intelligence, loyalty, fire. Qualities the Alpha King wanted in a mate. Qualities she'd been forced to develop simply to survive in Patricia's household, though no one had ever recognized them as strengths. Not that it mattered. The Alpha King wasn't looking for wolfless orphan servants. He was looking for a Luna who could stand beside him as an equal, who could command respect from every pack in the territories, who could produce strong wolf-blooded heirs to carry on his legacy. Everything Rosanna could never be. "Time to move," Colleen murmured. "Patricia's standing. They'll want the carriages ready to depart in 10 minutes. The afternoon portion of the journey was worse than the morning. The roads deteriorated as they traveled deeper into the neutral forests. The servants' carriage bounced and swayed so violently that Rosanna felt nauseated. One of the younger Omega servants actually got sick, and they had to stop so she could stumble into the bushes and empty her stomach. "Pathetic," one of the handmaids muttered. "If you can't handle a simple carriage ride, how are you going to survive the selection events?" The young Omega, she couldn't have been more than 14, looked mortified. Rosanna handed her a water skin without comment. Sometimes kindness required no words. They crossed into the territory of the Riverside Pack as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. This was the halfway point of their journey. Tomorrow they'd pass through 2 more pack territories before camping in the neutral zone just outside the Royal Pack's borders. Then on the 3rd day, they'd enter the Royal Pack's domain and approach the Alpha King's mansion. The Riverside Pack's way station was larger than Ironwood's, built to accommodate the heavy traffic that passed through their territory. Alpha Jules Lynch met them personally, a lean wolf with calculating eyes and a politician's smile. He welcomed Alpha Douglas with appropriate respect, complimented Luna Patricia's beauty, and told Alicia and Celeste they would surely catch the Alpha King's eye. Rosanna went through the same routine as before. Help the sisters change, arrange their hair, fetch whatever they needed, make herself invisible during the meal. By the time she finally collapsed onto a thin mattress in the servants' quarters, a long room lined with narrow beds where all the traveling servants would sleep, exhaustion had sunk into her bones, but sleep proved elusive. The other servants snored and muttered in their dreams. Someone coughed. Someone else thrashed as though fighting invisible enemies. Rosanna stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about tomorrow or the day after, or what waited for her at the end of this journey. Nothing waited. That was the truth. She'd serve Alicia and Celeste at the selection. She'd watch beautiful she-wolves compete for the Alpha King's attention. She'd pack everything up when it was over and ride back to Silver Crest, where she'd spend the next 60 years scrubbing floors and swallowing humiliation until her body gave out, or Patricia finally convinced Douglas to send her away. Girls like you don't get fairy tale endings. The words had become a mantra, a reminder, a cage built from truth. Rosanna finally drifted off sometime after midnight, her dreams troubled and dark. She dreamed of golden eyes again, watching her from shadows that seemed almost alive. She dreamed of running through forests she didn't recognize, her feet silent on ground that felt both foreign and familiar. She dreamed of a voice deep and commanding, speaking words she couldn't quite hear, but felt in her chest like thunder. When she woke at dawn, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The air felt different, charged like the moment before lightning strikes. She told herself it was nothing, just nerves about the journey, just exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. She had no way of knowing that everything was about to shatter, that the careful walls she'd built around her expectations were about to crumble. That destiny, which had ignored her for 17 years, was finally turning its attention her way. And when destiny looked at you, you couldn't look away. Chapter 3. The Royal Territory. The 3rd day of travel dawned with a blood-red sunrise that painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Rosanna had learned to read omens in the year she'd spent watching the world from her small window at the Silver Crest mansion. Red sky and morning meant storms coming. But as she stepped out of the cramped servants' quarters at the neutral zone camp where they'd spent the night, the air felt still, expectant, like the world itself was holding its breath. "Stop gawking and help load the carriages." One of Luna Patricia's handmaids shoved past her, arms full of folded blankets. "We need to reach the Royal Pack's borders by midday, and the Luna wants everything perfect when we arrive." Perfect. Everything always had to be perfect where Patricia was concerned. Rosanna moved to help with the loading, her muscles protesting after 3 days of constant work and terrible sleep. Her hands bore fresh blisters from rearranging trunk contents every time Celeste changed her mind about which dresses she needed immediately accessible. Her back ached from hours spent hunched over in the cramped carriage. Her head throbbed from lack of food servants, ate last, and by the time she got to the meals, only scraps remained. But she didn't complain. Complaining was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Rosanna," Alicia's voice carried across the camp. The Alpha's eldest daughter stood beside the main carriage, looking immaculate in a traveling dress of deep emerald that probably cost more than Rosanna would see in 5 years of service. "My hair needs to be rebraided. The wind destroyed it overnight, and I refuse to enter Royal Pack territory, looking like a common Omega." "Your hair looks perfect," Rosanna thought, but didn't say. Alicia's golden waves fell in exactly the artful disarray that took hours to achieve, but was meant to look effortless. Still, she retrieved the brush and pins from Alicia's personal grooming kit and set to work redoing braids that didn't need redoing. "Do you think he'll be there to greet us?" Celeste appeared, practically vibrating with excitement. "The Alpha King when we arrive at the mansion, or will we have to wait until tonight's welcoming ceremony?" "Mother said he greets all the visiting Alphas personally," Alicia replied, tilting her head so Rosanna could access the left side. "It's his tradition, a show of respect and authority. He'll probably stand at the mansion's entrance with his beta and high-ranking pack members, and will be presented formally." "I heard he's even more handsome in person than in the stories," Celeste interrupted. "Sarah from the Blackwater Pack told me her cousin saw him at the last selection, and she said he was so beautiful it hurt to look at him like staring at the sun." "Beauty doesn't matter if he's cruel," Alicia said, though her tone suggested she cared very much about beauty. "What matters is that he's powerful, the most powerful Alpha in 6 generations. Whichever of us he chooses will become the most important she-Alf in the Northern Territories." Rosanna's fingers worked automatically, weaving Alicia's hair into intricate braids that would hold even in wind. She'd stopped listening to the sisters' endless speculation about the Alpha King. They'd talked about nothing else for 3 days. His supposed looks, his rumored personality, his legendary strength, his exacting standards. Every conversation circled back to Cameron Livingston and how to catch his attention. There, Rosanna secured the final pin. "You look beautiful, Lady Alicia." Alicia examined her reflection in a small hand mirror, turning her head this way and that. For a moment, Rosanna thought she might actually express satisfaction. Instead, "The left side is slightly uneven. Fix it." The left side was perfect. They both knew it. But Rosanna unpinned the braid and started again, because arguing was pointless, and she'd learned to pick her battles years ago. By the time everyone was loaded and ready to depart, the sun had climbed higher, burning away the red tones and leaving behind pure golden light. The camp dissolved around them as the Silver Crest traveling party. 5 carriages in total began the final leg of their journey. The moment they crossed into Royal Pack territory, the difference was palpable. The forests here grew taller, older, their trunks wider than any Rosanna had ever seen. The road improved dramatically, no longer the rutted, barely maintained path they'd been traveling, but a smooth, well-kept highway that spoke of resources and organization. Wolves patrolled in pairs, their eyes sharp and their movements coordinated with military precision. These weren't casual sentries. These were trained warriors. "Look at the size of them," one of the Omega servants whispered from the servants' carriage. "That one must be over 7 feet tall, even in human form. How big would his wolf be?" "Big enough to tear through an entire raiding party single-handedly." Another replied, "They say the Royal Pack's warriors are the best in all the territories. Trained from childhood, absolutely loyal to the Alpha King." Rosanna pressed her face to the small window, watching the forest pass. Even the air felt different here, cleaner somehow, charged with a kind of energy she couldn't quite name. Power, maybe, or perhaps just the weight of centuries of tradition. The Royal Pack was the oldest pack in the territories, with a lineage stretching back to the original werewolf clans. Their alphas had always been the strongest, the most dominant, the natural leaders that other packs followed. And Cameron Livingston was said to be the strongest of them all. The forest opened suddenly into cleared land, and Rosanna's breath caught. The Royal Paean wasn't a mansion. It was a palace. 3 stories of stone and timber rose against the sky, with towers at each corner that stretched even higher. Wings extended from the main structure in perfect symmetry, creating a building that could probably house 500 wolves comfortably. Windows glittered like diamonds. Gardens sprawled in every direction, maintained with meticulous care. And beyond the palace, she could see other buildings, barracks for warriors, what looked like a massive training ground, smaller residences for high-ranking pack members. And in the distance, the hint of a town where the rest of the pack likely lived. This wasn't just a pack territory. This was a kingdom by the moon goddess. Colleen breathed beside her. "I've heard stories, but stories don't do it justice." Rosanna finished. The carriages followed the winding road toward the palace entrance. As they drew closer, Rosanna could see wolves gathering, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All in human form and dressed in formal attire, the welcoming committee. She realized the entire royal pack had turned out to greet the visiting alphas and their daughters. And at the center of it all, standing on the palace's grand entrance steps, was a figure that could only be the Alpha King. Even from a distance, Cameron's Livingston commanded attention. Tall, probably 6 1/2 feet, with a build that suggested both strength and speed. Dark hair that caught the sunlight. Features she couldn't quite make out yet, but the way he held himself spoke of absolute confidence, absolute power. He wore black, which should have looked somber but instead made him look dangerous, predatory, like something that had climbed out of the old stories grandmothers told to frighten children into obedience. The carriages rolled to a stop in the palace's circular drive. Rosanna watched through the window as Alpha Douglas emerged from the lead carriage, followed by Luna Patricia. Then Alicia and Celeste. Both sisters had gone pale beneath their carefully applied cosmetics, their earlier excitement transmuted into nervous energy. Cameron Livingston descended the steps. Even his movements were controlled, deliberate, like every gesture had been calculated for maximum effect. He greeted Alpha Douglas with a firm handshake and words Rosanna couldn't hear from her position in the servants' carriage. Patricia curtsied with perfect grace. Alicia and Celeste followed suit, their months of deport training evident in every movement. The Alpha King's gaze swept over them, and even from this distance, Rosanna felt the weight of it. Those eyes, they were gold, not brown with gold flecks, not amber but pure molten gold like coins catching firelight, the same eyes that had watched her from the shadows in her dreams. Impossible. She was tired, overwrought, seeing patterns where none existed. Servants remain in the carriages until the formal greetings are complete. One of the handmaids announced, "Then we'll be shown to our quarters and given our assignments for the selection period." Rosanna settled back against the hard bench, and tried not to stare at the palace. Tried not to imagine what it must be like to live in a place like this, where power soaked into the very stones, and every wolf knew their place in a hierarchy that had existed for centuries. She belonged in the servants' wing of such a place, if she belonged here at all. The formal greeting stretched for nearly an hour. Other packs were arriving. The Blackwater delegation, with their battle car, Alpha and fierce-looking niece, the Storm Ridge pack with their combat champion daughter, the Moonwater pack with twin sisters, who moved in perfect synchronization. Dozens of packs, each bringing their best unmated she-wolves, each hoping to forge an alliance with the royal pack through marriage to the Alpha King. It was spectacle and politics and tradition all wrapped into one carefully choreographed performance. Finally, a royal pack Omega approached the servant's carriage. She was young, maybe 20, with kind eyes and an efficient demeanor. "Visiting servants, please follow me. I'll show you to your quarters and explain the protocol for the selection period." The servants filed out, collecting their meager belongings. Rosanna shouldered her cloth bag and joined the procession, following the Omega toward a side entrance of the palace. Not the grand front doors. Those were for alphas and their daughters. Servants used the practical entrances that kept them separate from their beds. The Omega, she introduced herself as Nadita, led them through a maze of corridors. Even the servants' passages were nicer than the main halls at Silverest. Clean, well-lit, wide enough for two wolves to pass comfortably. They emerged into a large dormitorist-style room, lined with proper beds, not luxurious, but far better than the thin mattresses Rosanna was used to. "Visiting servants will stay here," Nadita explained. "Meals are served in the servants' dining hall at dawn, midday, and dusk. You're expected to be available to your assigned pack members at all times. The selection events begin tomorrow evening with the opening ceremony. Today is for settling in and preparing your ladies for tonight's welcoming feast." She distributed assignments, which servants would attend, which visiting she-wolves. Rosanna found herself assigned to both Alicia and Celeste. As expected, Luna Patricia had made certain her daughters would have familiar servants rather than trusting royal pack attendants. "The welcoming feast begins at sunset," Nadita continued. "All visiting alphas and their daughters will attend. It's formal. Your ladies will need their finest gowns and jewelry. The Alpha King will address the gathering and explain the selection events." Questions? No one had questions. Or if they did, they knew better than to ask. Rosanna found Alicia and Celeste's rooms on the palace's second floor, in a wing reserved for visiting she-wolves. The accommodations were stunning. Each sister had a private chamber with a canopy bed, ornate furniture, and windows overlooking the gardens. Their trunks had already been delivered and waited to be unpacked. Finally, Celeste threw herself dramatically onto her bed. "I thought that journey would never end. 3 days of terrible roads and worse company. We're here now," Alicia interrupted, already moving to examine the room's amenities. "And we need to focus. Tonight's feast is our first real impression. The Alpha King will be watching all of us, deciding who's worth his attention." "I'm wearing the silver gown," Celeste announced. "The one with the low back. Mother said it makes me look sophisticated. You'll look like you're trying too hard." Alicia countered. "I'm wearing the blue. Classic elegant, the kind of thing Aluna would wear." The argument continued, gaining momentum as both sisters defended their choices. Rosanna tuned them out and began the process of unpacking. Gowns needed to be hung to prevent wrinkles. Jewelry needed to be organized. Cosmetics needed to be arranged on the vanity. Shoes needed to be lined up and inspected for scuffs. Hours passed. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything in warm gold. Somewhere in the palace, Cameron Livingston was probably dealing with the logistics of hosting dozens of visiting packs and 100 potential mates. Rosanna wondered if he found it overwhelming, or if this was just another duty in a lifetime of duty. Not that it mattered to her. She'd never meet him, never speak to him. She was scenery in his story. If she appeared at all, Rosanna? Alicia's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Stop daydreaming and help me with this corset. The feast starts in 2 hours, and I need to look perfect. Perfect. Always perfect. Rosanna laced the corset, arranged the blue gown, styled golden hair into an elaborate updo that took 45 minutes, and would probably give her hand cramps later. She did the same for Celeste with the silver gown worn despite Alicia's protests and different but equally elaborate hair. She fastened necklaces, secured earrings, applied cosmetics with the precision of someone who'd been doing this for years. By the time both sisters were satisfied, the sun had nearly set. They examined themselves in the full-length mirrors with the focused intensity of warriors preparing for battle. In a way, they were. This was battle, just fought with beauty and charm instead of claws and teeth. "You've done acceptable work," Alicia finally said, which was probably the closest thing to praise Rosanna would receive. "Now wait here. We'll send for you if we need anything during the feast. Don't wander the palace. You're not a guest, and I won't have you embarrassing us by being found where you don't belong." "Yes, Lady Alicia." They swept out in clouds of perfume and rustling silk, leaving Rosanna alone in the empty room. She sank onto the edge of Celestia's bed. She'd never dare sit on Alicia's and finally allowed herself to breathe. The palace thrummed with life around her. She could hear music starting somewhere below, the sound of hundreds of wolves gathering for the welcoming feast, laughter, conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the shuffle of formal attire. A world she'd never be part of. Separated from her by invisible walls built from birth and circumstance, her stomach growled. She'd eaten nothing since a hasty breakfast of stale bread and weak tea. The servants' dinner wouldn't be served until after the feast ended, once all the visiting alphas and their daughters had been satisfied. Hours from now, probably. Rosanna stood and moved to the window. The view overlooked the palace gardens, and beyond them, the forest stretching endlessly toward distant mountains. The last rays of sunlight painted everything in shades of amber and rose. Beautiful, painfully, impossibly beautiful. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes. "This is not your world," she reminded herself. "This is not your story. You're just passing through." The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like grief. Chapter 4. The welcoming feast. The palace grew louder as evening deepened. Music swelled from the grand ballroom, a symphony of strings and woodwinds that spoke of centuries of tradition. Rosanna could hear the murmur of hundreds of voices, the clink of crystal, the rustle of expensive fabric as she-wolves positioned themselves for the Alpha King's attention. She wasn't supposed to be listening. She was supposed to remain in Celeste's room, waiting in case either sister needed her. But curiosity had always been her weakness, and after an hour of sitting alone, while her stomach cramped with hunger, she found herself drawn to the corridor outside just to see, just to understand what all of this looked like from the edges. The palace's second floor had a balcony that overlooked the grand ballroom, a viewing area meant for servants to observe formals in case their masters needed them. Rosanna made her way there quietly, keeping to the shadows, as she'd learned to do. A handful of other servants had already claimed positions along the railing, their eyes wide as they watched the spectacle below. And what a spectacle it was. The grand ballroom was enormous, easily 200 feet long and half as wide, with a ceiling that soared 30 feet above the polished marble floor. Chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, their crystal drops catching the light from hundreds of candles. Long tables laden with food stretched along the walls. Roasted meats, fresh breads, fruits and cheeses, desserts that looked like edible art. At the room's far end, A raised dais held a single table where the Alpha King and his highest-ranking wolves would sit. But it was the wolves themselves that caught Rosanna's attention. She'd never seen so many gathered in one place, alphas from dozens of packs, their power evident in the way others gave them space. Their daughters, the potential Lunas, dressed in gowns that cost more than most wolves would see in a lifetime. Blues and silvers, reds and golds, greens and purples, all carefully chosen to complement their features and make them stand out. Alicia stood near the center of the room in her blue gown, already surrounded by several visiting Alpha sons who'd clearly noticed her beauty. Celeste had found her way to a group of younger she-wolves, all of them laughing at something with the slightly desperate edge of people trying too hard to appear confident. Quite a sight, isn't it? A voice beside Rosanna made her jump. Nidita, the royal pack Omega, who'd shown them to their quarters, stood at the railing with a knowing smile. I've seen 3 selections now, and the opening feast never gets less impressive. It's Rosanna struggled for words. Overwhelming. That's intentional. The Alpha King wants everyone to understand the weight of what they're competing for. This isn't just a mating. It's a political alliance that will shape the territories for generations. Nidita's expression turned thoughtful, though I sometimes wonder if all the spectacle makes it harder to find genuine connection. Before Rosanna could respond, a ripple of energy swept through the ballroom. Conversations faltered. Wolves turned toward the main entrance, their attention pulled by some invisible force. The Alpha King had arrived. Cameron Livingston entered the ballroom with his beta, a massive wolf with silver-threaded dark hair, and 2 other high-ranking males Rosanna didn't recognize, but she barely noticed them. Her entire focus had narrowed to the Alpha King himself. The stories hadn't lied. He was beautiful in the way. Dangerous things are beautiful. All sharp angles and controlled power, with those impossible gold eyes that seemed to see everything at once. He moved with predatory grace, each step deliberate, commanding. The wolves in the room didn't bow. Alphas didn't bow to anyone, but they all acknowledged him with subtle shifts in posture, small nods of respect. This was what true power looked like. Not the petty cruelty of Luna Patricia, or the distant indifference of Alpha Douglas. This was authority so absolute it needed no assertion. Cameron took his place at the dais table, and only when he sat did everyone else begin to settle into their seats. The room hummed with anticipation. This was the moment that would set the tone for the entire selection. The Alpha King stood again, and the room fell instantly silent. "Welcome." His voice carried effortlessly across the massive space deep, commanding, impossible to ignore. To all the Alphas who have traveled here with their daughters. To all the she-wolves who have come to compete for the honor of becoming Luna of the Royal Pack, I extend my gratitude and respect. The selection is our oldest tradition designed to ensure that the strongest packs are led by the strongest pairs. Over the next 3 days, you'll be tested not just your beauty or your bloodlines. Those are merely starting points. You will be tested on your intelligence, your courage, your ability to lead, and your capacity for compassion. The Luna I choose must be able to stand beside me as an equal, not behind me as a decoration. A murmur ran through the assembled she-wolves. Some looked excited by the challenge. Others looked nervous. A few, including Alicia, Rosanna noticed, looked almost offended, as though being tested on anything beyond beauty was beneath them. "The first event begins tomorrow evening," Cameron continued. "The trial of wit. You'll be presented with a series of challenges designed to test your problem-solving abilities and creativity. Those who fail will be eliminated from the selection. Those who succeed will move on to the trial of courage the following day." He paused, his golden gaze sweeping across the room. For just a moment, so brief, Rosanna thought she'd imagined it. Those eyes lifted to the servants' balcony, not looking at anything in particular, just aware, acknowledging that servants existed, that they were watching, that they were part of this world, even if they occupied its margins. Then the moment passed. "Enjoy the feast," Cameron said. "Tomorrow we begin in earnest," he sat, and the tension in the room released like a held breath. Conversation resumed louder now, energized by nervousness and anticipation. Servant sauce royal pack wolves, not visitors, began circulating with wine and platters of food. The symphony struck up again, this time playing something livelier. "Trial of wit," Nadita murmured beside Rosanna. "That's new." Last selection. The first event was a formal ball where he just observed everyone. He must be serious about finding someone intelligent, not just beautiful. "Will many fail?" Rosanna asked before she could stop herself. "Probably. Some of these she-wolves have been trained their whole lives to be beautiful and charming, but not necessarily to think independently. The Alpha King doesn't want a Luna who'll just smile and agree with him. He wants a partner who'll challenge him." The concept was so foreign to Rosanna's experience that she almost couldn't process it. Patricia had raised her daughters to be agreeable, to defer to male authority, to use their beauty as their primary weapon. The idea that the Alpha King actually wanted disagreement, wanted challenge. "I should go," Rosanna said. Lady Alicia might need a commotion at the ballroom's entrance cut her off. Raised voices, the sound of someone protesting. Then Luna Patricia's unmistakable sharp tone. "How dare you? Do you know who I am?" Rosanna's stomach dropped. She knew that tone. Something had gone wrong. She hurried down from the servants' balcony, navigating the maze of corridors until she reached a side entrance to the ballroom. A small crowd had gathered near the main doors, mostly servants and lower-ranking wolves, trying to see what was happening without getting too close. Rosanna pushed through until she could see. Luna Patricia stood near the entrance, her face flushed with anger, confronting a royal pack guard. Behind Patricia stood Alicia and Celeste, and between them, Rosanna's heart stopped. A young schwolf, maybe 14, stood crying, while Celeste gripped her arm hard enough to leave bruises. The girl wore a servant's simple dress, now stained with what looked like wine. A serving tray lay on the floor. Crystal glasses shattered around it. "She spilled wine on my dress." Celeste shrieked, gesturing to a small stain on her silver gown's hem, "ruined it. This dress cost more than her entire pathetic life is worth." "I'm sorry," the girl sobbed. "It was an accident. I swear someone bumped me, and I don't care about your excuses." Celeste raised her hand as if to strike the girl. "Enough." The single word cut through the chaos like a blade. Alpha King Cameron had materialized beside them, his expression unreadable, but his presence overwhelming. Every wolf in the vicinity took an instinctive step back. Even Patricia, in all her rage, seemed to shrink slightly. "Release her," Cameron said to Celeste, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. Celeste's grip loosened immediately. The young servant stumbled away, still crying, and was caught by an older royal pack Omega who pulled her to safety. "Alpha King," Patricia began, her tone shifting to something falsely sweet. "I apologize for the disturbance. My daughter's gown was damaged by this clumsy servant, and we were merely expressing our—" "Your daughter was about to strike one of my pack members," Cameron interrupted. "In my home during a feast meant to honor guests and demonstrate respect." The ballroom had gone silent. Every eye was on them now. Rosanna could see Alicia's face had gone pale. Her earlier confidence evaporated. The girl spilled wine. Patricia tried again. "Surely you understand that such carelessness deserves. Accidents happen. Striking a servant for an accident demonstrates cruelty, not leadership." Cameron's gold eyes fixed on Celeste, who looked like she wanted the marble floor to swallow her whole. "Is that the kind of Luna you wish to be? One who uses her power to hurt those who cannot defend themselves?" Celeste opened her mouth, closed it, then managed to whisper, "No, Alpha King. Then, I suggest you apologize to my pack member and return to the feast. Consider this your first test and know that you failed it." The words landed like a physical blow. Celestia's eyes filled with tears. But these were different from the servant girls. These were tears of humiliation and rage. She stammered an apology that sounded like it had been dragged from her throat, then fled toward the ballroom's interior, Patricia following with a murderous expression. Alicia hesitated, caught between defending her sister and protecting her own chances. In the end, self-preservation won. She curtsied to Cameron and murmured something about her sister's stress before retreating as well. The crowd dispersed quickly, conversation resuming as wolves processed what they'd witnessed. But Rosanna remained frozen at the side entrance, her mind racing. The Alpha King had just publicly humiliated one of the competing she-wolves for mistreating a servant, had declared her failed before the selection had even truly begun, had defended the powerless over the powerful. Everything she thought she knew about how the world worked suddenly felt uncertain. "You there?" Rosanna's head snapped up. Cameron was looking directly at her, his golden eyes intent. Her first instinct was to run, but her feet seemed rooted to the floor. "You're with the Silvercrest delegation?" he asked. "Yes, Alpha King." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I serve the Alpha's daughters." Something flickered across his expression, too quick to identify. "You've been caring for them during the journey." "Yes, Alpha King. And tonight, you helped them prepare for the feast." Where was this going? Why was he asking? Rosanna nodded, not trusting her voice. Cameron studied her for a long moment, and Rosanna felt exposed, like those gold eyes could see straight through all her careful defenses to the lonely, desperate girl underneath, like he knew every secret she'd ever tried to hide. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Rosanna Alpha King, Rosanna Freridman." He repeated it as though testing how it felt. "Rosanna Freridman, thank you for your service to your pack." Then he was gone, returning to the Dias and the feast and the 100 she-wolves competing for his attention. But Rosanna stood frozen, her heart hammering, her skin tingling where his gaze had landed. He'd asked her name. The Alpha King had asked her name. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't mean anything. He'd probably forget it by morning. Just another servant's face in a sea of servants who kept his world running smoothly. But as Rosanna made her way back to the servants' quarters, the feast would continue for hours yet. And she desperately needed food. She couldn't shake the memory of those golden eyes meeting hers. The feeling that something had shifted, that invisible thread she couldn't see, had begun weaving a pattern she didn't understand. In the dormitory, she found a plate had been set aside for her needing. Probably simple food, but more than she usually received. She ate slowly, trying to process everything she'd witnessed. The Alpha King defended servants, valued intelligence over beauty, wanted a Luna who would challenge him. None of it made sense with the world Rosanna had grown up in, where power meant the right to be cruel, and questioning authority was met with punishment. She thought about Celesta's humiliation, about Patricia's barely contained rage, about how this would affect her when they returned to Silverest. The Luna would blame Rosanna somehow, she always did, would punish her for the family's embarrassment, even though Rosanna had nothing to do with it. But that was a problem for later. For now, she had 3 more days in this strange palace, where the rules seemed different, where servants mattered enough to defend, where the most powerful wolf in the territories had golden eyes that seemed to see everything. 3 more days before reality reasserted itself. Rosanna finished her meal and lay down on her narrow bed, exhaustion pulling at her bones. Around her, other servants whispered about the scene at the feast, about Celeste's humiliation, about how the Alpha King was unlike any Alpha they'd encountered. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about the way her name had sounded in Cameron Livingston's deep voice. Tried not to wonder why her heart was still racing. Tried not to hope for things that girls like her had no right to hope for, but hope. She was learning, didn't ask permission. It crept in through the cracks anyway. Dangerous and unwelcome and impossible to deny. Chapter 5. The Trial of Wit. Morning arrived with the sound of rain drumming against the palace windows. Rosanna woke before dawn. As she always did, her body trained by years of pre-dawn chores. The dormitory was still dark, filled with the soft breathing of sleeping servants. She dressed quietly and made her way to the servants' dining hall, where early risers could claim breakfast before the rush. The hall was nearly empty. Rosanna filled a bowl with porridge and found a corner table where she could eat without drawing attention. Her mind kept returning to the previous night, the feast, the confrontation, Cameron's golden eyes meeting hers. "What's your name?" She told herself to stop thinking about it. Told herself it meant nothing. She was still telling herself this when Nidita slid into the seat across from her. "You're up early," the Royal Pack Omega observed, holding her own bowl of porridge. "Can't sleep or just used to serve in hours both," Rosanna admitted. Nidita smiled. "I heard what happened last night with the Silver Crest daughter and our serving girl. The whole pack's talking about it." Rosanna's stomach clenched. "Is the girl all right? The one who spilled the wine, Helen?" "She's fine. Shaken, but fine. The Alpha King sent his personal healer to check on her, and he's assigned her to work in the kitchens for the rest of the selection, so she won't have to face any more visiting wolves." Nidita's expression turned thoughtful. "He's protective of his pack. Always has been. Some alphas see servants as disposable, but Cameron treats every member of the royal pack with respect. It's why we're so loyal to him." The casual use of his first name startled Rosanna. In Silverist, using an alpha's first name without permission would earn severe punishment. But Nidita said it naturally without fear. "What are they saying?" Rosanna asked quietly about last night. "That the Silver Crest daughter showed her true colors immediately. That she's exactly the kind of Luna the Alpha King doesn't want. That her sister, the one in blue, will probably be eliminated too, just by association." Nidita paused. "They're also saying you were there, that the Alpha King spoke to you." Heat crept up Rosanna's neck. "He just asked my name. It was nothing. Cameron doesn't do nothing. Every word, every gesture is intentional." Nidita studied her with interest. "What pack are you from originally?" "Before Silver." "I don't know. I was too young when my parents died to remember much. Alpha Douglas took me in after a rogue attack killed them. But you don't have a wolf." "It wasn't a question." Rosanna shook her head. "No, I should have shifted years ago, but nothing happens. I'm just stuck like this." "That must be difficult," Nidita said, and her sympathy sounded genuine. "The pack bond is such a fundamental part of who we are to not have access to that." She trailed off, then seemed to shake herself. "Well, maybe your wolf is just late. It happens sometimes. It didn't happen. Not really." Wolves who didn't shift by 18 never shifted at all. That was the medical consensus. Rosanna had 3 months left before her 18th birthday, and she'd long since stopped hoping for miracles. "The trial of wit starts this evening," Nidita said, changing the subject. "The competing she-wolves are probably terrified. Last time, Cameron held intellectual challenges. Half the participants were eliminated in the first round." "What kind of challenges?" "Riddles, logic puzzles, strategy games, things that test mental agility rather than physical prowess." Nita grinned. "It's fascinating to watch. You can see immediately who's been trained to think for themselves and who's just been trained to look pretty and agree with everything." Rosanna thought about Alicia and Celeste. Both had received education tutors in history, literature, basic mathematics. But Patricia had always emphasized that intellectual pursuits were secondary to beauty and charm. "Men don't want wives who are smarter than them," the Luna had said repeatedly. "They want wives who make them feel intelligent." Apparently, Cameron Livingston disagreed. The day passed in a blur of activity. Rosanna helped Alicia and Celeste prepare for the evening's trial, though both sisters were subdued after last night's humiliation. Celeste's eyes were red from crying, and she flinched every time someone knocked on her door. Alicia maintained her composure better, but Rosanna could see the tension in her jaw. The way her hands trembled slightly as she selected her gown for the evening. "Do you think he's already eliminated me?" Celeste asked suddenly, her voice small. She sat at her vanity while Rosanna arranged her hair. "The Alpha King, do you think last night means I have no chance?" Rosanna chose her words carefully. "I think tonight's trial is an opportunity to show him who you really are. But who I really am is someone who almost struck a servant for an accident." Celeste's reflection looked haunted. That's what he saw. That's what everyone saw. It was the most honest thing Rosanna had ever heard Celeste say. For just a moment, she saw past the alpha-spoiled daughter to the insecure girl. Underneath someone who'd been taught that power meant dominance, that mistakes deserved punishment, that servants existed to absorb the frustration of their betters. "Then show him something different tonight," Rosanna said quietly. "Show him you can learn from mistakes." Celeste's eyes met hers in the mirror. Something passed between them, not quite understanding, but maybe the beginning of it. Then the moment shattered as Luna Patricia swept into the room, her expression thunderous. "Are you ready?" "Patricia demanded both of you. The trial begins in 2 hours, and I will not have you embarrass this family further." "We're ready, Mother," Alicia said, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. Patricia's gaze fell on Rosanna. "You come with me now." Rosanna's blood turned to ice, but she followed Patricia into the hallway. The Luna waited until they were alone before rounding on her, fury radiating from every line of her body. "This is your fault," Patricia hissed. "If you'd kept better control of the serving situation, if you'd been paying attention instead of skulking in shadows, you could have prevented last night's disaster." The accusation was so illogical that Rosanna almost laughed. "Almost? Luna, I wasn't even in the ballroom when don't talk back to me." Patricia's hand shot out, gripping Rosanna's chin hard enough to bruise. "You've been a curse on this family since the day you arrived. Every embarrassment, every failure can be traced back to you and your presence in our lives. When we return to Silverest, we're going to have a serious discussion about your future, or lack thereof." The threat hung in the air between them. Rosanna had heard variations of it before, but something in Patricia's eyes made this feel different, more real, more immediate. "Do you understand me?" Patricia demanded. "Yes, Luna. Good. Now, make yourself scarce. I don't want to see your face until my daughters return from the trial." Patricia released her and stalked away, leaving Rosanna standing in the hallway with her heart hammering and her chin throbbing. She waited until the Luna disappeared around a corner before letting herself sink against the wall. "When we returned to Silverest, 3 days. She had 3 days before they went back to that mansion, to that life, to Patricia's escalating cruelty. 3 days before whatever future the Luna planned for her became reality. The hopelessness of it threatened to drown her. For a moment, just a moment, she'd let herself imagine something different. A world where servants mattered, where intelligence was valued, where girls like her could be seen as something more than disposable. But that world wasn't hers. It never would be. Rosanna pushed away from the wall and made her way toward the servants' wing. She'd find somewhere quiet to wait out the trial. Somewhere she could hide from Patricia's rage and Celeste's tears and Alicia's mounting desperation. Somewhere she could breathe. The palace had a library. She'd glimpsed it during her explorations yesterday. A vast room filled with thousands of books, with windows overlooking the gardens and comfortable chairs scattered throughout. It would be empty during the trial. All the important wolves would be in the great hall watching the competition. Rosanna found the library easily. The door stood open, and the late afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, painting everything in shades of gold. The smell of old paper and leather bindings wrapped around her like an embrace. She'd always loved books, though she'd had precious few opportunities to read them. Patricia considered reading a waste of time for servants. She wandered between the shelves, running her fingers along leather spines. History, philosophy, poetry, treatises on pack politics and werewolf biology. Stories from the old days when wolves and humans lived separately before the integration treaties. Most wolves avoid the library during trials. Rosanna spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Alpha King Cameron stood in the doorway, still dressed in the formal attire he'd worn the previous night. Those gold eyes watched her with an expression she couldn't read. Alpha King. Rosanna dropped into a curtsy, her mind racing. I apologize. I didn't mean to intrude. I'll leave immediately. You're not intruding. The library is open to anyone in the palace. He moved further into the room, and Rosanna's instincts screamed at her to run. Not from danger, exactly, but from something equally terrifying, attention, recognition. The weight of those eyes that saw too much. Shouldn't you be at the trial? The words escaped before she could stop them. Rosanna wanted to bite her tongue. Don't question the Alpha King. Don't draw his attention. Don't. It doesn't start for another hour. I find I think more clearly with time alone before major events. Cameron paused beside a shelf, pulling out a leather-bound volume. Do you read Rosanna Freridman? He remembered her name. He'd remembered her name. When I can, Alpha King, though I don't have much opportunity. Why not? The question was genuine, not rhetorical. Rosanna struggled to find an answer that wouldn't sound like she was complaining about her position. Servants, stay busy. There isn't much time for leisure activities. But you found time to come here. She couldn't explain about hiding from Patricia. Couldn't tell him that she'd come here, because everywhere else in the palace reminded her of everything she could never have. I like books. They show me worlds I'll never see. Cameron's expression shifted. That's a long time. Girls like me don't get to see much beyond the territory we're born into, Alpha King. Girls like you, he repeated the phrase, slowly. What does that mean? The conversation had veered into dangerous territory. Rosanna could feel it, could sense the subtle shift. That meant she was revealing too. Much, exposing vulnerabilities that could be weaponized. I should go, she said. The trial will start soon, and Lady Alicia might need. You're wolfless. It wasn't a question, but Rosanna nodded anyway. No point in denying something obvious. That must be difficult, Cameron said, echoing Nidita's words from the morning, especially in a pack like Silverest, where hierarchy is everything. It's fine. I manage. Do you? The quiet challenge in those two words made Rosanna's throat tight. No, she wanted to say, no, I don't manage. I survive. I endure. I wake up every day and tell myself that this is all there is, all there will ever be, and try not to scream from the weight of it. But she didn't say any of that. She stood silent, trapped between the bookshelf and the Alpha King's too knowing gaze. Last night, Cameron said finally, when that situation happened with my servant and the Silver Crest daughter, you were watching from the servant's entrance. Yes, Alpha King. You looked unsurprised, as though you'd seen similar scenes before. Rosanna's hands clenched at her sides. What was he asking? What did he want her to say? Celeste was stressed, she said carefully. The selection is important to her family. Sometimes stress makes people react poorly. That's a very diplomatic way of saying she's been taught that servants are acceptable targets for her frustration. Cameron set the book back on the shelf. I know Alpha Douglas. He's a good wolf, strong, fair in his way, but his mate. He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. Rosanna said nothing. Speaking poorly of Luna Patricia to anyone, especially the Alpha King, would have consequences she couldn't afford. You're loyal to your pack, Cameron observed. Even when that loyalty costs you, that's admirable. I have nowhere else to go, Alpha King. Loyalty is survival. Something in his expression changed, softened maybe, or perhaps just shifted into a different kind of intensity. Everyone deserves somewhere to belong, somewhere they're valued, not just tolerated. The words hit harder than they should have. Rosanna felt her eyes burning and blinked hard against the tears threatening to form. She would not cry in front of the Alpha King. Would not show weakness, would not. "The trial," she said abruptly. "You should go. They'll be waiting for you." Cameron studied her for a long moment. Then, inexplicably, he smiled just a slight curve of his mouth, but it transformed his face from dangerous to devastating. "You're right. I should go." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Rosanna Freriedman. You're welcome in this library anytime. That's not a courtesy. It's an order. If anyone questions your presence here, tell them the Alpha King granted permission." Then he was gone, leaving Rosanna alone among the books with her heart racing and her mind spinning. An order. He'd made it an order, which meant she couldn't refuse. Meant she had permission to exist in a space meant for those who mattered. Why? The question echoed in her mind as she sank into one of the comfortable chairs. Why had he sought her out? Why had he asked about her reading? Why did he look at her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve rather than a servant beneath his notice? It didn't make sense. Nothing about Cameron Livingston made sense. The rain had stopped. Through the windows, Rosanna could see wolves gathering in the gardens, moving toward the great hall where the trial of wit would take place. She should go, too, find a spot in the servants' gallery where she could watch Alicia and Celeste compete, where she could witness the spectacle of powerful wolves testing their minds against carefully crafted challenges. But for a few more minutes, she stayed in the library, surrounded by books and the lingering scent of whoever the Alpha King wore, cedarwood and rain, and something wilder that had no name. For a few more minutes, she let herself exist in the space between servant and something more, between invisible and seen, between hopeless and hoping. Then Rosanna stood, smoothed her worn dress, and made her way toward the great hall. Whatever happened next, whatever Patricia had planned, whatever the trials brought, whatever strange attention the Alpha King had decided to grant her, she'd face it the way she'd faced everything else in her life, one breath at a time, one step at a time, until either the world broke her or she figured out how to break free. Chapter 6. Torn Silk and Golden Eyes. The great hall had been transformed overnight. Gone were the feast tables and dancing space. In their place stood a series of stations, 10 in total, each one containing a different challenge. Rosanna could see puzzle boxes, strategy game boards, scrolls covered in what looked like ancient text, and various other intellectual tests arranged throughout the massive room. The competing shelves gathered in the center, all 100 of them dressed in evening gowns that ranged from understated elegance to eye-catching extravagance. Alicia had chosen deep purple tonight, a color that complemented her golden hair. Celeste wore pale pink, probably hoping to project innocence after last night's disaster. Rosanna found her place in the servants' gallery above the hall. From here, she had a clear view of everything: the competitors, the challenges, and the raised platform where Cameron sat with his beta and several high-ranking royal pack members. The Alpha King looked as composed as ever, his gold eyes surveying the assembled she-wolves with an expression that gave nothing away. "Welcome to the trial of wit." Cameron's voice carried effortlessly through the hall. "Before you stand 10 challenges, each tests a different aspect of intelligence, logic, creativity, pattern recognition, strategic thinking, language comprehension, and more. You have until midnight to complete as many as you can. Points are awarded based on difficulty and accuracy. The 30 she-wolves with the lowest scores will be eliminated from the selection." A ripple of anxiety passed through the competitors. 30 eliminated meant 70 would remain. Those weren't terrible odds, but they weren't comfortable either. "You may work alone or collaborate," Cameron continued. "Though remember, Aluna must be able to stand on her own when needed. Choose your approach wisely." Begin. The hall erupted into controlled chaos as she-wolves rushed toward different stations. Rosanna watched Alicia head straight for what looked like a logic puzzle, her competitive nature overriding any nervousness. Celeste hesitated, then followed her sister, probably hoping Alicia would help her. The challenges were fascinating to watch. At one station, she-wolves had to decode an encrypted message using only the basic cipher key provided. At another, they manipulated a complex, mechanical puzzle that required patience and spatial reasoning. A third station challenged them to play a strategic board game against a royal pack wolf who was clearly a master at it. Rosanna found herself leaning forward, engaged despite herself. She'd always been good at puzzles, had spent countless lonely hours in her small room, working through logic problems she created in her journal. It was one of the few pleasures Patricia hadn't been able to take from her. An hour passed. Some she-wolves moved confidently between stations, accumulating points. Others struggled, frustration evident in their expressions. Rosanna watched one alpha's daughter throw an actual tantrum when she couldn't solve a riddle, screaming about how intelligence tests were beneath her breeding. 2 royal pack guards escorted her from the hall. Eliminated by default, Alicia was holding her own, moving methodically from challenge to challenge. She wasn't the fastest, but she was thorough. Celeste lagged behind attempting challenges, but rarely completing them successfully. Her earlier confidence had crumbled, replaced by visible panic. Your pack sisters aren't doing well. Rosanna turned to find Nidita settling beside her in the gallery. The Omega held 2 cups of hot tea, offering one to Rosanna. Alicia's managing, Rosanna said, accepting the tea gratefully. Celeste is drowning. Nidita finished. I'd feel sorry for her if she hadn't tried to strike Helen last night. As it is, I'm watching her fail with some satisfaction. Rosanna wanted to defend Celeste. Pack loyalty demanded it, but the words stuck in her throat. Celeste had been cruel. Was cruel regularly. The fact that she'd been raised that way didn't erase the harm she'd caused. The Alpha King is watching you. Rosanna's head snapped toward the platform. Cameron's attention was indeed directed at the servants' gallery, and for a heart-topping moment, his gold eyes locked with hers. Then his gaze shifted to something else, and Rosanna could breathe again. I imagined it, she said. You didn't. Nita's expression turned speculative. He asked about you this afternoon. Ask my sister. She's one of his personal assistants. Whether you were being treated well during your stay, why would he care about that? That's what everyone's wondering. Nidita sipped her tea. Cameron doesn't show interest in wolves randomly. Everything he does is intentional. So, either you did something to catch his attention, or what? Or you're his mate, and the bond is starting to recognize itself. The words were so absurd that Rosanna actually laughed, a short, sharp sound that drew looks from nearby servants. That's impossible. I don't have a wolf. There's no bond to recognize. Mate bonds don't always require both parties to have shifted, Nidita said thoughtfully. The connection exists on a level deeper than the wolf. It's rare, but documented, and Cameron has been unmated for 28 years, despite having dozens of opportunities. Maybe he's been waiting for someone specific. Someone who's definitely not a wolfless servant from a pack that just embarrassed itself at his selection, Rosanna said firmly. You're imagining patterns where none exist. But even as she said it, she remembered the way Cameron had looked at her in the library. The way he'd asked about her reading, her life, her lack of opportunities, the way he'd given her permission in order to use the library whenever she wished. Everyone deserves somewhere they belong. No, she couldn't let herself think this way. Couldn't let hope root itself any deeper. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to expectations, and expectations led to devastating disappointment. A commotion below drew her attention back to the trial. At one of the stations, a she-elf had apparently solved a particularly difficult challenge that had stumped everyone else. Cameron himself stood to acknowledge her success, and the she-wolf, a striking omega from the Blackwater pack, practically glowed with pride. The competition continued. Rosanna watched she-wolves succeed and fail, saw alliances form and dissolve, witnessed the full spectrum of intelligence on display. Some were genuinely brilliant. Others had clearly never been challenged intellectually before and were floundering badly. Alicia finished her 5th challenge and moved toward a 6th language translation puzzle that required knowledge of ancient Pack dialect. Rosanna could see her sister studying the text. Her brow furrowed in concentration, but Celeste had stopped trying. The Alpha's younger daughter stood in the corner, tears streaming down her face, her earlier panic having evolved into complete shutdown. She'd attempted maybe 3 challenges total and failed all of them. At this rate, elimination was certain. Rosanna felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Celeste was cruel, yes, spoiled and thoughtless, but she was also 16 and terrified, and watching her dreams crumble in front of hundreds of witnesses. That kind of public humiliation left scars. The clock struck 10, 2 hours remaining. She-wolves who'd completed most of the challenges began helping others. A strategic move that demonstrated leadership and collaboration, but no one approached Celeste. Her outburst last night had poisoned any potential alliances. Alicia glanced at her sister once, calculation clear in her expression. She could help Celeste, but that would cost her own points in time. In the end, self-preservation won. Alicia returned to her challenge, leaving Celeste alone in her failure. "That's cold," Nidita murmured. Even for competitors, it was cold. It was also exactly what Patricia would expect, what she'd probably explicitly instructed. Don't let sentiment weaken you. Win at any cost. The minutes crawled by. Rosanna found herself unable to look away from Celeste's misery. Even as she told herself it wasn't her problem, the girl had made her own choices, had built her reputation on cruelty, deserved whatever consequences came from that. But consequences and deserving were complicated concepts when you'd spent your life on the receiving end of casual cruelty yourself. 11 came and went. The pace of the competition slowed as she-wolves finished their final challenges or gave up on the ones they couldn't solve. The royal pack wolves managing each station tallied scores. The tension in the hall had become almost physical. Everyone knew elimination was coming, knew that 30 dreams would die tonight. Finally, midnight arrived. "Time," Cameron announced. "Please return to the center of the hall." The competitors gathered, their earlier excitement replaced by exhaustion and anxiety. Some looked confident, others looked sick. Celeste had stopped crying, but her face was blotchy and her eyes were red. She stood slightly apart from everyone else, already bracing for rejection. "The results have been tallied," Cameron said. "First, I want to acknowledge that every she-wolf here demonstrated courage by competing. Intelligence tests are often more revealing and more frightening than physical challenges. You showed up. You tried. That matters." His gaze swept across the assembled wolves, and Rosanna noticed how many of them stood straighter under his attention. Leadership, she realized. True leadership wasn't about dominance and fear. It was about making people feel seen, valued, even in failure. The following she-wolves will advance to the trial of courage tomorrow. Cameron began reading names. Each one was met with visible relief or barely contained joy. Alicia's name came early. She'd placed in the top 20. Rosanna felt a moment of pride despite everything. More names, more relieved faces. The list stretched on. Celeste's name wasn't called. The remaining she-wolves, 30 of them, as promised, stood in a cluster that felt heavier by the moment. Celeste was among them, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "For those who are being eliminated," Cameron said, his voice gentler, "now understand that this is not a judgment of your worth. It's simply recognition that different wolves have different strengths. The Luna I'm seeking needs specific qualities, and not every qualified wolf will possess them. You competed with honor. That's what matters. The words were kind, but they couldn't erase the sting of rejection. The eliminated she-wolves filed out of the hall, some with dignity, others barely holding back tears. Their alphas would be disappointed. Their packs would see them as failures. The shame would follow them for years. Celeste left without looking back, and Rosanna felt something uncomfortable twist in her chest. Relief? Satisfaction? No, something more complicated than either. Something that felt uncomfortably like understanding. The hall gradually emptied. The remaining 70 she-wolves dispersed to their rooms, probably to rest before tomorrow's challenge. The royal pack-wolves began dismantling the trial stations. Rosanna made her way down from the servants' gallery, intending to check on Alicia and then find her own bed. She didn't expect to find Celeste in the corridor, outside the great hall, slumped against the wall with her face in her hands. She didn't expect the Luna Patricia to be standing over her daughter, fury radiating from every line of her body, and she definitely didn't expect to hear Patricia hiss. "You're an embarrassment, a disgrace. When we return home, you'll pay for this humiliation tenfold." Rosanna stopped, frozen in the shadows. She should leave. This was a family matter, not her business. But something kept her rooted in place as Patricia continued her vicious tirade, each word calculated to destroy. This was how Patricia operated, building people up only to tear them down more effectively. Celeste might be cruel, but she'd learned that cruelty from somewhere, from someone who wielded emotional violence like a weapon. Luna Patricia. Rosanna's voice surprised even her. Both Patricia and Celeste turned, shock evident on their faces. "Lady Alicia is looking for you. She wants to discuss her performance in the trial." It was a lie. A clumsy, obvious lie, but it gave Patricia an exit from the confrontation. And for some reason, Rosanna found herself offering it. Patricia's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but she straightened. "We'll continue this conversation later, Celeste. Don't think your failure will go unpunished." She swept away, leaving Rosanna alone with the Alpha's youngest daughter. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "Why did you do that?" Celeste asked finally, her voice. "After everything I've done to you." "I don't know," Rosanna admitted. It was the truth. She didn't know why she'd intervened, why she'd drawn Patricia's attention away, why she'd offered protection to someone who'd never offered her anything but contempt. "I failed," Celeste whispered. "I failed, and now she'll make my life hell, and I deserve it because I'm stupid and useless." "And you're not stupid." The words came out firmer than Rosanna intended. "You were overwhelmed." "There's a difference." Celeste looked up, her tear-stained face suspicious and hopeful at once. "You think I could have done better? I think you were taught that intelligence doesn't matter as much as beauty. And then you were thrown into a competition that valued exactly what you were told to ignore. That's not your fault." It was perhaps the most honest thing Rosanna had ever said to any member of the Bray family. Celeste stared at her like she'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "I was cruel to you," Celeste said slowly. "All those years I was so cruel. Yes, you were. I'm sorry." The words sounded rusty. Like Celeste had never said them before and wasn't quite sure how they worked. "I'm sorry for all of it, for everything." Rosanna didn't know what to say to that. Apologies didn't erase years of casual cruelty, didn't heal the wounds that had accumulated like scar tissue over her heart, but they were something, a start maybe, or at least an acknowledgement that harm had been done. "You should rest," Rosanna said finally. "Tomorrow will be difficult enough without exhausting yourself tonight." Celeste nodded and slowly stood. She looked smaller somehow, as though elimination had physically diminished her. "Rosanna, thank you for lying to get Mother away from me. I know you. Didn't have to do that." Then she was gone, leaving Rosanna alone in the corridor with her thoughts spinning. The palace had grown quiet. Most wolves had retired for the night. Rosanna made her way toward the servants' dormitory, her mind a tangle of confusion. This day had been nothing like she'd expected, Cameron noticing her. Nita's absurd theory about mate bonds. Celeste apologizing. Patricia's threats hanging over everything like storm clouds. She'd almost reached the dormitory when she heard footsteps behind her. Rosanna Freridman. That voice. She'd recognize it anywhere now. Deep and commanding, impossible to ignore, Rosanna turned to find Alpha King Cameron approaching through the dim corridor. He still wore his formal attire from the trial. Though he'd shed the ceremonial cloak, in the low light his gold eyes seemed to glow. Alpha King, she dropped into a curtsy. Is something wrong? Walk with me. It wasn't a request. Cameron gestured toward a side corridor that led deeper into the palace. Rosanna followed because refusing wasn't an option, her heart hammering so hard she could barely think. They walked in silence through empty hallways until they reached a small courtyard Rosanna hadn't seen before. A fountain burbled at its center, surrounded by night-blooming flowers that filled the air with sweet fragrance. The moon hung overhead, nearly full, bathing everything in silver light. I saw what you did, Cameron said, stopping beside the fountain with the Silver Crest daughter. Celeste Rosanna's blood ran cold. I didn't mean to interfere, Alpha King. You protected her from her mother's cruelty. Even though she's never shown you kindness, even though you had every reason to walk away and let her suffer. Cameron turned to face her fully, and the intensity of his gaze made Rosanna's breath catch. Why? I don't know, Rosanna admitted for the second time that night. It seemed like the right thing to do. The right thing. Cameron repeated the words thoughtfully. Even when it cost you nothing to walk away, even when she deserved the consequences of her actions, you chose compassion. It was exactly what a Luna would do, Cameron interrupted. See past the immediate situation to the larger truth. Recognize that cruelty breeds cruelty, and sometimes breaking that cycle requires intervention from someone unexpected. Rosanna's mind went blank. Had he just compared her to know? That was impossible. She was reading too much into simple words. I'm not, she started. No, you're not competing in the selection, Cameron agreed. You're not eligible. You don't have a wolf. You're wolfless. Servant status. With no political connections and no pack standing, each word landed like a blow. Rosanna forced herself to meet his eyes to keep her expression neutral even as shame burned through her. And yet, Cameron continued, his voice softening, you show more leadership qualities in a single spontaneous moment than most of those competing she-wolves have demonstrated in days of carefully planned performances. The courtyard seemed to tilt. Rosanna grabbed the fountain's edge to steady herself. Alpha King, I don't understand what you're saying, don't you? No, I'm a servant. I scrub floors and arrange hair and stay invisible. That's all I've ever been, all I'll ever be. Cameron moved closer, not threatening, but deliberate. Each step felt weighted with significance. Rosanna couldn't quite grasp. What if that's not true? He asked quietly. What if you've been forced into invisibility by wolves who feared what you might become if you were actually seen? That's not. Rosanna's voice broke. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. I know you love books, but rarely get to read them. I know you have blisters on your hands from years of hard labor. I know you flinch when people raise their voices, which suggests you've been yelled at frequently enough to develop defense reactions. I know you're intelligent enough to help the Silver Crest daughters prepare for trials you'll never be allowed to compete in yourself. I know you're kind even when kindness costs you. And I know, he stopped abruptly, something flickering across his expression. What? Rosanna whispered. What else? Cameron's hand lifted, and for a moment, Rosanna thought he might touch her face. Instead, he gestured toward the palace. You should rest. Tomorrow's trial will be physically demanding, and your pack members will need you. The dismissal felt jarring after the intensity of the previous moments. Rosanna curtsied again, confused and unbalanced. Yes, Alpha King. Thank you for the conversation. She turned to leave. Rosanna. She stopped, looked back. Cameron's gold eyes held hers, and in them she saw something that looked dangerously like longing. You deserve better than what you've been given. I hope you know that. Then he was gone, disappearing into the palace's shadows, leaving Rosanna standing alone beside the fountain with her entire worldview cracking at its foundations. She deserved better. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the territories, thought she deserved better. Rosanna made it back to the dormitory on shaking legs. She collapsed onto her narrow bed without bothering to change clothes. Around her, other servants snored and muttered in their sleep, oblivious to the earthquake happening inside her chest. What if you've been forced into invisibility by wolves who feared what you might become? The question echoed through her mind, unanswering and unanswerable. She was nothing, had always been nothing, wolfless, orphaned, powerless. The universe itself had marked her as unworthy when it denied her a shift. But Cameron Livingston looked at her like she mattered, and that was either the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to her or the beginning of something she'd stopped letting herself believe in years ago. Either way, tomorrow would bring answers she wasn't sure she was ready for. Chapter 7. Torn Silk and Royal Protection. Morning arrived too quickly. Rosanna woke with her mind still tangled in the previous night's conversation with Cameron. You deserve better than what you've been given. The words had haunted her dreams, leaving her exhausted despite hours of sleep. She dressed mechanically and made her way to the servants' dining hall. The palace buzzed with excitement about tonight's trial of courage rumors. Suggested it would involve some kind of physical challenge in the forest surrounding the royal Pax territory. Rosanna half listened to the gossip while forcing down breakfast she couldn't taste. You look terrible, Nadita observed, sliding into the seat beside her. Didn't sleep. Not well, Rosanna admitted. Nightmares or dreams that felt too much like hope. Something like that. The day stretched ahead with the particular dread that came from knowing something bad was waiting, but not knowing exactly what form it would take. Patricia's threats from the previous day hung over everything. The Luna would be furious about Celeste's elimination, and she'd need someone to blame, someone powerless, someone who couldn't fight back. Rosanna had been that someone for 12 years. She knew how this ended. But first, she had duties. Alicia had advanced to the next round, which meant helping her prepare for tonight's challenge. Rosanna gathered her courage and made her way to Alicia's chambers. She found both sisters there. Alicia sitting at her vanity while Celeste lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling with red-rimmed eyes. The contrast was stark. Alicia looked energized, ready to prove herself further. Celestia looked hollowed out, like elimination had scooped away everything that made her who she was. There you are, Alicia said without turning. I need you to help me select the right outfit for tonight, something that shows athleticism but remains feminine. The Alpha King is testing courage, which probably means some kind of physical trial, and I refuse to look weak. Yes, Lady Alicia. Rosanna moved to the wardrobe, grateful for the familiar routine. She pulled out several options: riding attire, a modified hunting dress, flexible leather pants with a fitted tunic. Mother came by this morning, Celeste said suddenly, her voice flat. She said, I've disgraced the family that when we return to Silverest, I'll be confined to the estate for 6 months as punishment. No social events, no friends visiting, just isolation and shame. Alicia's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Rosanna felt that uncomfortable sympathy again, the kind she didn't want to feel for someone who'd caused her so much pain. I'm sorry, Rosanna offered quietly. Are you? Celestia's laugh was bitter. Why would you be sorry? This is what I deserve, isn't it? Karma for all the cruelty. That's not how I see it. Then you're kinder than I've ever been. Celeste rolled over, facing away from both of them. Just leave me alone, both of you. I don't want pity. Alicia selected the leather pants and tunic combination, then dismissed Rosanna with instructions to return 2 hours before the trial to help with hair and final preparations. Rosanna fled gratefully, relieved to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the sisters' complicated grief and anger. She spent the afternoon in the library, Cameron's orders, she told herself. Though part of her hoped she might encounter him again, but the vast room remained empty except for her and the books. She lost herself in a volume about ancient pack traditions, learning about the original Luna selections that had taken place centuries ago when territories were first being established and alliances were forged through strategic matings. The early selections had been brutal physical combat between shelves, tests of endurance that killed the weak, challenges designed to prove fertility and strength above all else. Modern selections were civilized by comparison, focused on compatibility and partnership rather than pure dominance. But they all shared one core belief. The Luna must be worthy of standing beside the Alpha, must be strong enough, smart enough, powerful enough to lead, must have a wolf. Rosanna closed the book and pressed her palms against her eyes. 24 hours ago, she'd understood her place in the world, had accepted the limitations of her existence. Then Cameron Livingston had looked at her with those gold eyes and suggested she might be something more than what she'd been told. And now she couldn't unknow it, couldn't unsee the possibility, however impossible it was. The afternoon shadows lengthened. Rosanna returned the book to its shelf and made her way back to Alicia's chambers. Time to fulfill her duties. Time to remember who she really was. A servant whose moment of attention from the Alpha King had been nothing more than a temporary anomaly in the natural order. Alicia was already partially dressed, pacing her room like a caged wolf. Finally, my hair needs to be braided back. Something practical that won't fall apart during physical activity. Rosanna set to work, her fingers moving through the familiar motions. French braid, tight and secure. Alicia's golden hair gleamed in the late afternoon light. Perfect as always. Do you think I can win? Alicia asked suddenly. The entire selection. Do you think the Alpha King would choose me? The question startled Rosanna. Alicia never asked for opinions, never showed vulnerability. You're intelligent and beautiful. You've made it this far. That's not an answer. Rosanna met Alicia's eyes in the mirror. I think he's looking for something specific. Something that goes beyond intelligence and beauty. Like what? Compassion, genuine kindness, the ability to see past status and hierarchy to the person underneath. I don't know, Rosanna lied. Alicia studied her reflection with critical eyes. He spoke to you last night. I saw you in the courtyard with him. Rosanna's hands stilled. He was just... Don't lie to me. The Alpha King doesn't have private conversations with servants for no reason. What did he want? He thanked me for helping with something earlier. It was nothing, was it? Alicia's gaze sharpened, because it looked like considerably more than nothing from where I stood. It looked like the most powerful wolf in the territories was paying very close attention to a wolfless servant from our pack. The accusation hung in the air between them. Rosanna forced herself to breathe normally, to keep her expression neutral. I'm sure you misinterpreted what you saw. Lady Alicia, the Alpha King has 100 shelves competing for his attention. Why would he waste time on me? That's what I'd like to know. Alicia turned on her seat, facing Rosanna directly. You're not competing. You can't compete. So, whatever game you think you're playing, I'm not playing any game, Rosanna interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. I'm doing exactly what I've always done. Serving your family, staying invisible, existing on the margins of a world that has no place for me. Something in Alicia's expression shifted, not quite softening, but perhaps calculating differently. He asked about you at the trial before it started. He asked my father who you were, why a wolfless girl was serving our family. Rosanna's heart stuttered. What did Alpha Douglas say? That you were an orphan he'd taken in out of charity, that you'd been with us since childhood, that you were loyal despite your limitations. Alicia's tone made the words sound like an insult, and the Alpha King looked at my father like he'd just admitted to something shameful, like taking in an orphan and making her a servant was somehow wrong. Lady Alicia, finish my hair, Alicia. Cut her off and stay away from the Alpha King. Whatever you think is happening, whatever attention you think you're receiving, it's not real. It can't be real. You're wolfless, Rosanna. Nothing changes that. Rosanna completed the braid in silence, her mind racing. Cameron had asked about her. Had looked at Alpha Douglas like charity turned. Servitude was shameful. Had noticed her existence enough to question it. You're dismissed, Alicia said once her hair was finished. I'll make my own way to the trial. I don't need you hovering. Rosanna curtsied and fled. The palace was chaos as evening approached. Servants rushed through corridors, carrying supplies for the trial. Royal packwolves in formal attire made their way toward the forest where the challenge would take place. Visiting alphas gathered with their competing daughters. Offering last-minute advice and encouragement, Rosanna followed the flow toward the forest, staying to the edges as always. The trial would take place in a clearing about half a mile from the palace, far enough to feel wild, close enough for spectators to watch safely. Torches had been set up around the clearing perimeter, their flickering light pushing back the encroaching darkness. A raised platform held seats for the alphas and high-ranking wolves. Additional platforms, smaller and less ornate, had been erected for servants and lower-ranking pack members. Rosanna found a spot on one of the servant platforms, squeezing between two royal pack omegas, who were placing bets on which she-wolves would succeed. The 70 remaining competitors gathered in the clearing center, all of them dressed in practical attire suitable for physical challenges. Alicia stood near the front, her expression focused. Around her, other she-wolves stretched and prepared, some looking confident, others visibly nervous. Cameron emerged from the forest on the far side of the clearing, flanked by his betas and several warriors. He'd changed into hunting leathers that somehow made him look even more dangerous than his formal attire. The gold of his eyes caught the torchlight as he surveyed the gathered she-wolves. The trial of courage, he announced, his voice carrying easily through the clearing, tests your ability to face fear, to push beyond perceived limitations, and to demonstrate the kind of bravery that defines true leadership. Tonight's challenge is simple in concept, complex in execution. He gestured toward the dark forest behind him. These woods contain a course I designed personally. It includes physical obstacles, strategic decisions, and moments that will test your nerve. Your goal is to navigate from here to a marker deep in the forest and return with a token that proves you completed the challenge. There are 40 tokens. 30 she-wolves will advance to tomorrow's final trial. A murmur rippled through the competitors. 40 tokens for 70 she-wolves meant direct competition. Some would fail, simply because others got there first. The course is designed to be completed in either human or wolf form, Cameron continued. Those who can shift may do so. Those who cannot will not be penalized. The obstacles are manageable either way, though they may require different approaches. What matters is that you complete the challenge with courage and integrity. His gaze swept across the assembled she-wolves, and for just a moment so brief, Rosanna thought she might have imagined it. Those gold eyes lifted to the servant platform, where she sat, met hers across the distance, held for a heartbeat. Then the moment passed. You have until dawn, Cameron said. Begin. The clearing erupted as she-wolves sprinted toward the forest. Some shifted immediately. The sound of bones cracking and reforming filled the air as wolves burst forth. their enhanced speed and senses giving them immediate advantage. Others remained human, perhaps saving their energy or lacking confidence in their wolf forms. Alicia was among those who shifted. Her wolf was beautiful golden fur, sleek build, powerful hunches. She disappeared into the forest with a pack of other shifted she-wolves, their forms quickly swallowed by darkness. "This is going to be interesting," one of the Omegas beside Rosanna murmured. "Some of those she-wolves have never been in real wilderness. Grew up in cities with manicured parks. They're about to learn what actual forest feels like." The spectators settled in to wait. It would be at least an hour before the fastest competitors returned. Servants circulated with refreshments. The alphas on the main platform discussed the challenge, their voices carrying faintly across the clearing. Rosanna watched the forest's edge, trying not to think about the fact that she'd never be able to complete a challenge like this. Not without a wolf. Not without the enhanced senses and physical capabilities that came with shifting. She was fundamentally limited in ways that no amount of courage or determination could overcome. "Those who cannot will not be penalized," Cameron's words. An acknowledgement that not all she-wolves could shift easily, that some might have injuries or conditions that prevented transformation, or perhaps impossibly an acknowledgement that wolfless competitors might exist someday, might be allowed to compete despite their limitations. No, that was fantasy. Wishful thinking that would only lead to heartbreak. Time crawled. The first competitor emerged from the forest after 70 minutes. A powerfully built she-wolf from the Ironwood pack. Carrying a silver token that glinted in the torchlight, she shifted back to human form and presented the token to Cameron, who nodded approval. 1 down, 39 to go. More she-wolves began returning. Some looked triumphant. Others looked exhausted. One emerged with a badly twisted ankle, limping heavily but still clutching her token with fierce pride. The tokens accumulated slowly. 5, 10, 15, 20. Then the pace slowed. The remaining she-wolves were either struggling with the course or had gotten lost in the dark forest. Rosanna watched as 30 tokens were claimed. Then 35, then 38. 2 tokens left. 32 she-wolves still in the forest. The spectators grew restless, murmuring concerns about the missing competitors. Cameron dispatched scouts to ensure no one was injured or in danger. Minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Finally, movement at the forest's edge. A she-wolf burst from the trees, shifted mid-stride back to human form, and sprinted toward Cameron with a token held high. 39. 1 token left. More minutes passed. More murmuring from the spectators. Then multiple she-wolves emerged from the forest simultaneously, all sprinting toward Cameron. They'd apparently been near each other in the course and realized the same thing at the same time. Only 1 token remained. Alicia was among them. The clearing erupted into chaos as 7 exhausted she-wolves converged on Cameron, all desperately trying to reach him first. One stumbled, another was knocked aside by a competitor's shoulder. The remaining 5 stretched their legs, pushing their exhausted bodies beyond their limits. Alicia was second. A she-wolf from the Riverside pack reached Cameron a split second before her, gasping as she presented the final token. Alicia skidded to a stop, her face cycling through shock, disbelief, and then devastation. Eliminated the Alpha's golden daughter, eliminated in the trial of courage by a matter of seconds. The clearing fell silent. Everyone had expected Alicia to advance. She was strong, fast, intelligent, but the challenge had come down to pure speed, and someone else had been fractionally faster. Alicia stood frozen, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with the kind of shock that came from having your entire self-concept shattered around her. The other eliminated she-wolves reacted with tears or protests or numb acceptance. But Alicia just stood there, breaking apart in slow motion while hundreds of wolves watched. Then Luna Patricia's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "This is your fault." Rosanna's blood turned to ice. Patricia had risen from her seat on the main platform and was pointing directly at her, directly at Rosanna. If you had prepared her properly, if you had helped her train instead of skulking around, drawing the Alpha King's inappropriate attention, my daughter would have succeeded. Patricia's voice rose to a shriek. You cursed this family the day you entered it. Everything you touch fails. The accusation was so absurd, so divorced from reality, that Rosanna couldn't even process it. But every eye in the clearing had turned to her now. She felt exposed, pinned under hundreds of stares that ranged from curious to contemptuous to confused. Luna Patricia, Alpha Douglas tried to intervene, his voice embarrassed. Don't defend her. She's poisoned our household, turned our own daughters against us. Look at Alicia eliminated because that girl couldn't do her job properly. Patricia was advancing across the clearing now, her rage building with each step. When we return to Silverest, she's gone. Do you hear me, Douglas? I want her out of our home, out of our pack. I don't care where she goes or what happens to her. She's no longer our problem. The words landed like physical blows. Rosanna couldn't breathe. Cast out. Patricia was going to cast her out. No pack, no home, no protection. Just exile into a world that had no place for wolfless orphans. Death sentence. That's what this was. Now, Patricia, Alpha Douglas said, but his voice lacked conviction. He wouldn't fight his mate on this. Would let her have her way as he always did. Rosanna stood frozen on the servant platform, her mind blank with terror. Where would she go? What would she do? Wolfless she-wolves couldn't survive as rogues. They lacked the abilities necessary to hunt, to defend themselves, to navigate between territories without pack protection. Patricia reached the servant platform and grabbed Rosanna's arm, her fingers digging in painfully. Get down here. Face the consequences of your failures. Rosanna stumbled down from the platform, her legs barely supporting her weight. The clearing had gone silent. Even the other competitors had stopped their various reactions to watch this new drama unfold. Look at her, Patricia hissed, spinning Rosanna to face the assembled wolves. Pathetic, worthless, wolfless, and somehow she thought she could. Patricia's hand shot out and gripped the neckline of Rosanna's dress. The fabric was old, worn thin from years of use and washing. It had been one of Rosanna's mother's dresses, altered to fit her smaller frame. One of the few possessions she had from her life before the Bray family. You don't even deserve the charity of decent clothing. Patricia snarled. Then she yanked. The fabric tore with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silent clearing. The dress's neckline ripped completely, exposing Rosanna's shoulder and the top of her chest. Patricia yanked again, and the tear extended down the bodice, the worn fabric offering no resistance. Rosanna tried to hold the dress together, tried to cover herself, but Patricia was relentless. She tore at the fabric again and again, each pull exposing more skin, more vulnerability, more humiliation. Stop, Rosanna whispered. Please stop. But Patricia was beyond reason, beyond anything except the need to destroy, to humiliate, to break this girl who'd somehow become the target for every frustration and disappointment. The dress hung in tatters. Rosanna's arms crossed over her chest, trying desperately to preserve some dignity, some protection. Tears streamed down her face. She'd never felt so exposed, so utterly demolished in front of so many witnesses. That's enough. The voice cut through everything quiet, but carrying such absolute authority that even Patricia froze. Cameron Livingston moved through the clearing like a force of nature, wolves parting before him instinctively. His gold eyes blazed with something Rosanna had never seen before. Not anger exactly, something colder, more dangerous. He reached them in seconds and without ceremony, shrugged out of his formal cloak. It was massive, designed for a wolf over 6 feet tall, with the broad shoulders of a trained warrior. Royal blue silk lined with silver embroidery that marked it as belonging to the Alpha King himself. Cameron draped the cloak around Rosanna's shoulders, It swallowed her completely, hanging nearly to the ground, wrapping her in fabric that smelled like cedarwood and rain and safety. His hands were gentle as he fastened the clasp at her throat, his fingers barely brushing her skin, but sending electricity through her entire body. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly, his eyes searching her face. Rosanna shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Cameron turned to Patricia, and the Luna actually took a step back. "You will return to your chambers immediately. You will remain there until your pack departs tomorrow morning. If I see you anywhere in my territory before then, I will have you removed by force. Do you understand, Alpha King? I was merely— Do you understand?" Patricia's mouth snapped shut. She managed a shaky nod, then fled toward the palace, her earlier fury transmuted to fear. Cameron turned to Alpha Douglas, who'd gone pale. "We'll discuss this situation tomorrow morning before you leave. For now, your pack is dismissed from tonight's gathering. It wasn't a request." Alpha Douglas nodded and retreated, gesturing for his pack members to follow. The Silver Crest wolves filed away, leaving Rosansa standing alone in the clearing, wearing the Alpha King's royal cloak, while hundreds of wolves stared. "The trial is concluded," Cameron announced to the assembled spectators. "The 30 advancing she-wolves should report to the Great Hall tomorrow at sunset for instructions regarding the final challenge. Everyone else is dismissed." The clearing emptied slowly, wolves departing in small groups, while, whispering furiously about what they'd witnessed, Rosanna stood, frozen, clutching the cloak around herself, trying to understand what had just happened. When the last spectator had gone, Cameron turned to her. His expression had softened from that cold fury to something gentler. "Come with me. We need to talk." "I'm wearing your cloak," Rosanna said stupidly. Everyone saw. "Yes, they did. They'll think people will assume." "Let them assume." Cameron gestured toward a path leading away from the clearing. "Please, Rosanna. Walk with me." She followed because she had nowhere else to go. Because the Alpha King had just defended her publicly. Because she was wearing his royal cloak and everyone had seen, and nothing would ever be the same again. They walked in silence until they reached the same courtyard from the previous night. The fountain, the night-blooming flowers, the moonlight painting everything silver. Rosanna's mind spun with questions she couldn't voice, fears she couldn't name, hopes she definitely shouldn't feel. Cameron stopped beside the fountain and turned to face her. In the moonlight, his gold eyes looked almost luminous. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and you're not going to believe it." Rosanna pulled the cloak tighter around herself. "Try me. After tonight, I'll believe almost anything." Cameron took a breath, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain, vulnerable, almost afraid. "You're my mate," he said, "my true mate. I've known since the moment I first saw you." The world tilted sideways. Rosanna's knees buckled, and if Cameron hadn't caught her, she would have collapsed. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I don't have a wolf. There's no bond. There can't be. The bond doesn't require both parties to have shifted. It's rare, but it exists. I felt it the moment our eyes met." Cameron's hands steadied her, his touch sending heat through the heavy cloak. "I felt it, and I knew, but I couldn't tell you. Couldn't claim you because you're from another pack. And taking another Alpha's pack member without permission could start a war. But tonight that Alpha allowed his mate to assault you publicly, to destroy your clothing and humiliate you in front of hundreds of witnesses, he demonstrated that he cannot or will not protect you." Cameron's jaw tightened, which means the treaty that bound you to Silverest is void. You're not obligated to return with them tomorrow. Rosanna's mind refused to process what she was hearing. Mate, the Alpha King thought she was his mate, was offering her protection, was suggesting she didn't have to go back to Patricia's cruelty and Douglas's indifference. "This can't be real," she said. "Things like this don't happen to girls like me." "Why not?" Cameron's hands moved to frame her face, gentle but sure. Why can't you be chosen? Why can't you matter? Why can't the universe decide that a wolfless orphan from a cruel household is exactly who the most powerful alpha in the territories needs? Because it doesn't work that way. It does tonight. It works that way right now. Cameron's thumb brushed away a tear Rosanna hadn't realized had fallen. I'm asking you to stay, to choose yourself for once, to let me protect you the way you should have been protected all along. Everyone will say I don't deserve this. Then everyone will be wrong. Rosanna looked up into those impossible gold eyes and saw nothing but certainty. Nothing but conviction that she wolfless, powerless, invisible Rosanna Friedman was worthy of protection, of care, of being chosen. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I, Cameron admitted. Terrified, actually, because I've never felt this way before, never believed in fate or destiny or bonds that transcend logic. But then I saw you and I knew. And if you say no, if you choose to leave tomorrow with the Silver Crest Pack, I'll respect that choice. But I'm asking you, begging you to stay. The courtyard spun around them. Or maybe that was just Rosanna's world reorganizing itself into a shape she didn't recognize. A shape where she mattered, where she was chosen, where hope wasn't a luxury, but a birthright. I'll stay, she heard herself say. I don't know what that means or how it works or what happens next, but I'll stay. Cameron's expression transformed relief and joy, and something that looked almost like wonder. Thank you for trusting me, for choosing yourself, for being brave enough to accept something that seems impossible. He pulled her into an embrace, and Rosanna let herself be held for the first time in 12 years. Let herself feel safe. Let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, girls like her did get fairy tale endings after all. The royal cloak wrapped around them both, sealing them together in fabric and moonlight, and a bond that defied every rule she'd ever learned about how the world worked. Tomorrow would bring questions and consequences and complications. But tonight, in this moment, Rosanna let herself have this one impossible thing: hope. Chapter 8. The Aftermath of Choice. Rosanna woke in a bed that wasn't hers for a disorienting moment. She couldn't remember where she was. The mattress beneath her was too soft, the blankets too fine, the room too large. Then memory crashed back the trial, Patricia's rage, the torn dress, Cameron's cloak, the impossible words he'd spoken in the moonlight courtyard. You're my mate. She sat up abruptly, her heart hammering. Dawn light filtered through enormous windows that overlooked the palace gardens. The room around her was elegant without being ostentatious: comfortable chairs, a writing desk, bookshelves filled with actual books, and the massive bed she currently occupied. Cameron's royal cloak lay draped over a chair near the fireplace, its blue silk catching the early light. A knock at the door made her jump. Come in. Her voice came out uncertain. Nidita entered, carrying a tray laden with breakfast foods: fresh bread, honey, berries, cheese, eggs cooked perfectly. The Omega's expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes sparkled with barely suppressed excitement. Good morning, Nidita said, setting the tray on a small table near the window. The Alpha King asked me to bring you breakfast and to inform you that he'd like to speak with you after you've eaten and dressed. There's a wardrobe full of clothing in various sizes. He had it brought from the pack stores last night. Everything should fit. Rosanna stared at the tray, her mind struggling to process. Where am I? The guest wing. This suite is reserved for visiting dignitaries. And Nita paused meaningfully. Potential future Lunas. The words hung in the air between them. Rosanna's hands twisted in the sheet. Everyone knows, don't they? About last night, about the cloak. The entire territory knows. Probably half the northern territories by now. Nidita moved to the wardrobe and opened it, revealing rows of dresses, pants, tunics, and other clothing. When the Alpha King publicly gives his royal cloak to someone, it's not subtle. It's a declaration of protection and, well, usually of courtship. I didn't ask for this, Rosanna whispered. I never wanted to cause problems or draw attention or, hey, Nidita crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, her expression gentle. You didn't cause anything. Luna Patricia caused this by attacking you. The Alpha King simply responded to unacceptable cruelty. Everything that happened after was just consequence. But I'm nobody. Wolfless from a pack that just got publicly humiliated. Why would he choose me? Because mate bonds don't care about status or wolf abilities or political convenience. Nidita squeezed Rosanna's hand. They just are. And from what I've heard, Cameron has been waiting 28 years for his mate to appear. Maybe the universe just needed time to get you here. The concept was too enormous to fully grasp. Rosanna focused on immediate concerns instead. The Silver Crest Pack is supposed to leave this morning. Alpha Douglas and Luna Patricia will expect me to go with them. The Alpha King is handling that conversation right now. Actually, he requested a meeting with Alpha Douglas at dawn. Nidita stood and moved back to the wardrobe, which is why you should eat and get dressed. You'll probably be called to that meeting once they've discussed the political situation. Political situation. That's what her entire life had become. A political situation requiring negotiation between alphas. Rosanna forced herself out of bed. Her body ached from yesterday's emotional trauma. Her mind felt foggy from too little sleep and too much stress. But she couldn't hide in this beautiful room forever. She ate mechanically while Nidita selected clothing from the wardrobe. A simple but well-made dress in deep forest, green with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt. This will work, Nidita said. Appropriate for a formal meeting, but not overly fancy. You want to look like someone who belongs here without appearing like you're trying too hard. Rosanna changed behind a privacy screen, acutely aware that every piece of clothing she wore now belonged to the royal pack, that she was accepting their hospitality, their protection, their implied claim on her future. The dress fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her body specifically. There's a mirror, Nidita offered. Rosanna approached it hesitantly. The girl staring back looked nothing like the servant, who'd arrived at the royal pack territory 4 days ago. The dress transformed her from invisible to visible, from dismissed to acknowledged. Her dark hair, usually pulled back, severely hung loose around her shoulders. Without the exhaustion and constant anxiety etched into her features, she looked different. Younger, maybe, or perhaps just less defeated. You're beautiful, Nidita said quietly. You always were, but now you look like you're starting to believe it. Before Rosanna could respond, another knock sounded. A royal pack warrior stood in the doorway, massive even by werewolf standards, with silver threading his dark hair and scars that spoke of decades of service. Miss Friedman, the Alpha King requests your presence in his study. I'm to escort you, Miss Friedman. Not servant or girl or any of the dismissive terms she'd grown accustomed to. A title that implied respect. Rosanna followed the warrior through the palace's corridors. Servants and pack members they passed stopped to stare, some curious, some disapproving, some openly fascinated. News traveled fast in pack territories, and she'd become the center of the biggest scandal to hit the royal pack in years. The Alpha King's study was located in the palace's west wing, behind heavy wooden doors carved with scenes of ancient battles and alliances. The warrior knocked once, then opened the door at Cameron's called permission. The study was exactly what Rosanna expected. Filled with maps, books, correspondence, the accumulated tools of leadership, but it was the occupants that made her stomach drop. Cameron stood behind a massive desk, his expression carefully neutral. Beside him stood his beta, the silver-haired warrior she'd seen at the trials, and seated in chairs facing the desk were Alpha Douglas and Luna Patricia. Patricia's face was a mask of barely controlled fury. Douglas looked tired, caught between his mate's rage and the political reality of confronting the most powerful alpha in the territories. Rosanna, Cameron said, his voice gentle despite the formal setting. "Thank you for joining us. Please sit." A chair had been positioned slightly apart from Douglas and Patricia, not with them, but not entirely separate either. Rosanna sat, keeping her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap. Years of training in proper posture served her. "Now, we've been discussing your situation," Cameron continued. "Alpha Douglas has confirmed that you've been a member of the Silver Crest Pack since the age of 5, taken in as an act of charity after your parents' deaths. Is that correct?" Rosanna nodded. "Yes, Alpha King. And in those 12 years, what has your role been within the pack?" The question felt loaded. Rosanna glanced at Douglas, whose expression remained carefully blank. "I've served the Alpha's family. Cleaned, cooked, assisted with whatever was needed." "Served," Cameron repeated. "Not trained as a pack member. Not educated in pack politics or given opportunities to develop your abilities. Served as one might a servant. She was given shelter." Patricia interjected sharply. "Food, clothing, protection. More than most orphans receive. Shelter in exchange for labor." Cameron interrupted, his tone cooling. "Protection that failed spectacularly last night when you physically assaulted her and destroyed her clothing in front of hundreds of witnesses. Care to explain how that demonstrates your pack's charity?" Patricia's jaw clenched. "The girl has been nothing but trouble since." "The girl," Cameron said softly, dangerously, "has a name, Rosanna Freeridman, and she is as of last night under my personal protection, which means any further disrespect directed toward her is disrespect directed toward me. Do we understand each other?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, to defend herself, to rail against the injustice of losing control over someone she'd spent 12 years dominating. But even she wasn't foolish enough to directly challenge the Alpha King in his own territory. "We understand," Douglas said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. "Good." Cameron's attention shifted back to Rosanna. Under normal circumstances, transferring a pack member from one territory to another requires extensive negotiation and often significant compensation. However, these are not normal circumstances. You were taken in as charity, not formally adopted. You have no blood ties to the Silver Crest Pack, and last night demonstrated that remaining with them places you in danger legally. The case for your transfer is strong." "Transfer?" Rosanna's voice came out barely above a whisper. "If you choose to stay," Cameron clarified. "This is your decision, Rosanna. Not mine, not Alpha Douglas's, not anyone else's. You can return to Silverest with them this morning, or you can remain here under Royal Pack protection. But I want you to make that choice with full understanding of what each option means." He moved around the desk, his posture shifting from Alpha King to something more personal. "If you return to Silver Crestus, I cannot protect you from whatever consequences Patricia has planned. Pack law prevents me from interfering in another Alpha's internal matters unless there's clear evidence of abuse, rising to the level of criminal conduct. What happened last night was humiliating, but not technically illegal. Future punishments would likely be subtle enough to avoid outside intervention." Patricia's expression confirmed everything Cameron wasn't quite saying. If Rosanna went back, her life would become a systematic hell designed to break her spirit without leaving evidence. However, Cameron continued, "If you choose to stay, you'll be formally transferred to the Royal Pack. You'll be given housing, employment appropriate to your skills, and full pack member status. You'll be under my direct protection, which means any wolf who threatens or harms you answers to me personally. And what would you expect in return?" The question came out before Rosanna could stop it. For that protection, that generosity, something flickered across Cameron's face. "Nothing you're not willing to give." "This isn't a transaction, Rosanna. This is me offering you the choice you should have had 12 years ago. The choice to decide your own future." But there's more to it than that, Douglas interjected, his voice careful. Isn't there, Alpha King? The cloak you gave her last night wasn't just protection. It was a claim, a public declaration, that you're considering her as a potential mate. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading through the sudden tension. Yes, Cameron said simply. It was, and I won't pretend otherwise. I believe Rosanna is my mate. I felt the bond the moment I saw her, but recognizing a bond and acting on it are two different things. If she chooses to stay, we'll explore that connection at whatever pace she's comfortable with. If she chooses not to pursue a romantic relationship, her protection remains unchanged. The offer of pack membership isn't conditional on her accepting me as a mate. Rosanna's head spun. He was offering her everything: safety, status, choice, and the possibility of a future she'd never dared imagine. But accepting meant burning every bridge to her past. Meant confirming Patricia's accusations that she'd been scheming for power. Meant stepping into a spotlight that had spent 17 years avoiding. Can I think about it? She asked quietly. No. Patricia's voice cut through like a whip. You don't get to think about it. We're leaving this morning and you're coming with us. You're Silvercrest Pack. You've always been Silvercrest Pack, and you don't get to abandon your duties just because you caught the Alpha King's eye through whatever manipulation you Luna Patricia. Cameron's voice dropped to a tone Rosanna had never heard before. Absolutely glacial, carrying the weight of command that could probably level mountains. One more word and I will have you removed from this territory by force and declare you persona non grata in royal packlands. Test me. Patricia's mouth snapped shut, but her eyes promised murder. Cameron turned back to Rosanna, his expression softening. You have until noon to decide. That gives you 4 hours. I suggest you spend that time not thinking about what anyone else wants or expects, but about what you want, what you deserve, what kind of life you want to build. Where should I go? Rosanna asked. To think anywhere in the palace or grounds, the library, the gardens, wherever you feel most comfortable. You're not a prisoner here, Rosanna. You're a guest considering whether to become family. The meeting dissolved after that. Douglas and Patricia were escorted out, Douglas looking resigned, Patricia radiating barely suppressed fury. Cameron's beta left with them, probably to ensure they actually departed the palace without causing additional problems, which left Rosanna alone with Cameron in the study. I'm sorry, he said as soon as the door closed, for putting you in this position, for making your life complicated. 4. Don't. Rosanna found her voice. Don't apologize for being the first person in 12 years to treat me like I matter. Even if I can't accept everything you're offering, even if I have to go back with them, you gave me something no one else has. You made me feel seen. Cameron crossed the space between them in 2 strides and took her hands in his. The touch sent electricity up her arms, made her skin tingle with awareness. You are seen by me, by the universe, by whatever force brought you into my territory at exactly the right moment. And Rosanna, I hope you stay. Hope it so much it terrifies me. But whatever you decide, know that you deserved better than what you received. Always. He released her hands and stepped back, giving her space. 4 hours. Find your answer in whatever way feels right. Rosanna left the study in a daze. The palace corridors seemed different now. Not a temporary shelter, but a potential home. She wandered without direction until she found herself in the library, surrounded by thousands of books, and the scent of old paper and leather. This was where Cameron had found her 2 days ago, where he'd given her permission to exist in a space meant for those who mattered, where she'd started believing that maybe she wasn't as worthless as Patricia had spent convincing her she was. Rosanna sank into one of the comfortable chairs and tried to organize her thoughts. Option 1. Return to Silvercrest, face Patricia's wrath, endure whatever punishments the Luna devised, spend the rest of her life as a servant, invisible, and powerless until her body gave out or Patricia finally convinced Douglas to cast her out entirely. Option 2. Stay at the Royal Pack. Accept Cameron's protection. Become a pack member with actual status. Explore the possibility of a mate bond with the most powerful alpha in the territories. When she framed it that way, the choice seemed obvious. But it wasn't just about logic or self-preservation. It was about identity, about loyalty, about the complicated tangle of obligation and fear that had defined her existence for so long. Silver Crest had been cruel, but it had also been home. The only home she remembered. Leaving meant abandoning the last connection to her parents, to the pack they'd belonged to the life she might have had if they'd lived. But staying meant choosing herself, choosing hope over habit, choosing the possibility of happiness over the certainty of suffering. What do you want? Cameron's question echoed through her mind. What did she want? Not what she should want, not what others expected, not what seemed practical or safe or appropriate. What did Rosanna Friedman actually want? She closed her eyes and let herself imagine. Imagined waking up in that beautiful guest suite every morning. Imagined spending days in this library, reading whatever she wanted. Imagined working at something meaningful instead of just scrubbing floors and absorbing contempt. Imagined Cameron looking at her with those gold eyes that saw everything that recognized her worth when no one else ever had. Imagine being chosen, being wanted, being loved. The wanting was so strong it hurt. But wanting and deserving were different things, weren't they? Patricia had spent 12 years teaching her that lesson. Wolfless orphans didn't deserve fairy tale endings, didn't deserve powerful mates or political protection or lives that mattered. Except Cameron had looked at her and decided differently. Had seen her limitations, no wolf, no status, no pack standing, and declared them irrelevant. Had offered her choice and freedom and the possibility of something more. Who was she to argue with the Alpha King's judgment? The thought made her smile despite everything. It was absurd. All of it was absurd. 4 days ago, she'd been scrubbing floors and trying to be invisible. Now she was sitting in the Royal Pack's library, trying to decide whether to accept a mate bond with the most powerful wolf in the territories. Life apparently specialized in absurdity. Rosanna opened her eyes and looked around the library at the books that represented knowledge she'd never been allowed to pursue. At the comfortable chairs that suggested leisure she'd never experienced. At the windows overlooking gardens she'd never been permitted to enjoy. This could be hers. All of it. Not just the physical space, but what it represented. A life where she mattered, where her intelligence was valued, where she could be more than just the sum of her limitations. All she had to do was choose it. The decision crystallized in that moment, sharp and clear, and terrifying in its finality. She'd spent 17 years letting other people decide her worth, define her future, control her existence. Maybe it was time to decide for herself. Rosanna stood and made her way back through the palace. She knew where Cameron would be. Nadita had mentioned he spent every morning in the training grounds with his warriors. She found the grounds easily. Following the sounds of combat and the smell of exertion, Cameron was in the center of the training circle, sparring with his beta in a display of controlled violence that was mesmerizing to watch. Both wolves moved with the fluid grace of apex predators, their strikes perfectly timed, their defenses impeccable. They fought like they'd been doing this together for decades, each anticipating the other's moves. The match ended when Cameron swept his beta's legs and pinned him in under 3 seconds. The watching warriors erupted into applause. Cameron helped his beta up, both of them laughing, and then his gold eyes found Rosanna standing at the training ground's edge. His expression shifted hope and fear, and desperate wanting, all mixing together into something that made Rosanna's chest ache. She walked toward him, aware that every warrior in the training ground had stopped to watch, aware that this moment would be remembered, talked about, analyzed for years to come. 4 hours aren't up yet, Cameron said quietly as she reached him. I know, Rosanna took a breath. But I don't need 4 hours. I know my answer. The training ground had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. I want to stay, Rosanna said clearly, letting her voice carry. I want to transfer to the royal pack. I want to accept your protection. And I want to explore whatever this connection between us is because you're right. I felt it, too. From the moment our eyes met, I just didn't have a word for it. Cameron's expression transformed into something that looked like wonder. You're sure? Because once you say yes, once the transfer is formalized, there's no going back. You'll be royal pack. Mine to protect. Mine too. Yours, Rosanna interrupted. If you'll have me, all my limitations and complications and lack of wolf included. Especially those, Cameron said. Then he was pulling her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her while the entire training ground erupted into cheers and howls of approval. When he set her down, his hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. You just changed my entire life, Rosanna Friedman. You know that funny, she said, smiling through the tears. You did the same thing to mine. Cameron kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent, like she was something precious that might break. Welcome home. Home. After 17 years of existing in spaces that merely tolerated her presence, she finally had a home. The concept was so enormous, so transformative that Rosanna could barely process it. But as Cameron led her away from the training ground, his hand warm and solid around hers, his warriors still cheering behind them, she let herself believe it. She was home, she was chosen, she was wanted. And maybe, just maybe, girls like her did get fairy tale endings after all. Chapter 9. The Final Trial. The news of Rosanna's transfer spread through the royal pack territory like wildfire. By midday, every wolf in the palace knew that the Alpha King had claimed a mate, a wolfless former servant from the Silver Crest pack, who'd been publicly humiliated and then publicly protected in a display that would be talked about for generations. Rosanna spent the afternoon in a strange state of suspended reality. Nidita helped her move her meager possessions from the servants' dormitory to the guest suite that was apparently now hers. The Omega chattered excitedly about mate bonds and selection protocol and what this meant for the final trial tonight. But Rosanna only half listened. Her mind kept circling back to the same impossible fact. She'd chosen to stay, had accepted Cameron's offer, had agreed to explore a bond that defied every rule she'd thought governed the universe. You're not listening to anything I'm saying, are you? Nidita asked with fond exasperation. Sorry. Rosanna shook herself. I'm just processing. Well, process faster because we need to get you ready for tonight's gathering. The final trial is happening, and as the Alpha Kings acknowledged, mate, you can't exactly hide in the servants' gallery anymore. The thought made Rosanna's stomach clench. Where am I supposed to sit on the dais? With Cameron and the high-ranking royal pack members, Nidita pulled a dress from the wardrobe, deep midnight blue silk that shimmered when it caught the light. This should work. It's formal enough for the occasion, but not so elaborate that you'll feel like you're wearing a costume. Rosanna stared at the dress. 4 days ago, she'd been helping Alicia and Celeste select their gowns for the selection. Now, she was the one being dressed for a formal event, being positioned as someone who mattered instead of someone who served. The cognitive dissonance was dizzying. I don't know how to be that person, Rosanna admitted quietly. The one who sits on the dais instead of watching from the shadows. The one people pay attention to instead of ignoring. Then you learn, Nidita said simply. Same way you learned everything else in your life. One step at a time. The afternoon dissolved into preparation. Nidita styled Rosanna's hair into something elegant but not overly complicated. Soft waves pinned back from her face with silver clips that caught the light. The midnight blue dress fit perfectly, hugging her frame in ways that made her look older, more sophisticated, more like someone who belonged beside an alpha king. "There," Nadita said, stepping back to survey her work. "You look beautiful, and before you argue that you don't deserve this or shouldn't be here, or any of the other self-defeating thoughts running through your head, stop. You were chosen by the most powerful alpha in the territories. That means something. Act like it." A knock at the door interrupted Rosanna's response. Cameron stood in the hallway, dressed in formal black attire, with silver embroidery that marked his status. His gold eyes widened slightly when he saw her. "You look," he seemed to struggle for words. "Bradicane." Heat crept up Rosanna's neck. "Nita's work, not mine." "I helped," Nadita said cheerfully, "but the raw material was already there. I just highlighted it." She gathered her things and headed for the door, pausing to whisper to Rosanna on her way out. "Stop selling yourself short. It's unbecoming of a future Luna." Then she was gone, leaving Rosanna alone with Cameron. "Are you ready?" he asked gently. "Tonight will be intense. The final trial, the announcement of the chosen Luna, and the fact that I've already made my choice public. There will be questions, speculation, probably some resentment from she-wolves who competed and lost to someone who wasn't even eligible." "I'm terrified," Rosanna admitted. "But I've been terrified for most of my life. At least this time. I'm scared while wearing a beautiful dress and standing beside someone who actually wants me here." Cameron's expression softened. "I more than want you here. I need you here. The thought of going through tonight's ceremony without you beside me is," he trailed off, shaking his head. "Just stay close. I'll handle any wolves who have problems with our bond." They walked through the palace together, Cameron's hand resting lightly at the small of Rosanna's back. A gesture of protection and possession that sent warmth through her entire body. Wolves they passed stopped to stare. Some looked curious, others looked scandalized. A few mostly royal pack members smiled with genuine happiness. The great hall had been transformed again. Gone were the intellectual challenge stations from the trial of wit. In their place, a massive ceremonial setup dominated the space, a raised dais at the front, where Cameron would sit with his chosen Luna. Rows of seating for visiting alphas and high-ranking wolves, and standing room for everyone else. Banners representing every pack in the Northern Territories hung from the ceiling, their colors creating a rainbow of political alliance and territorial pride. The 30 she-wolves who'd advanced from the trial of courage were already gathered. All of them dressed in their finest gowns. All of them wearing expressions that ranged from nervous excitement to resigned acceptance. They knew something had shifted. Knew that the Alpha King giving his royal cloak to a wolfless servant meant the selection's outcome had already been decided. But tradition demanded the final trial proceed anyway. Demanded that honor be paid to the she-wolves who'd competed, that their efforts be acknowledged, that the ceremony conclude with proper respect for ancient customs. Cameron led Rosanna to the dais and seated her beside his own chair, a position that would normally be reserved for the chosen Luna. The statement was unmistakable. Every wolf in the hall understood immediately. The selection was over. The Luna had been chosen. Everything else was formality. The competing shelves filed into their positions. Rosanna's eyes found Alicia in the crowd, not on the dais where the competitors stood, but in the audience section, with the eliminated wolves. The former golden daughter of Silvercrest looked diminished somehow, her usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like humility. Their eyes met across the distance, and Alicia gave a small nod. Not quite approval, but perhaps acceptance. Cameron stood, and the hall fell silent. "We gather tonight for the final trial of this selection," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the vast space. "The 30 she-wolves before you have demonstrated intelligence, courage, and dedication throughout these challenges. They represent the best their packs have to offer. Strong, capable wolves who would serve any alpha with honor. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled competitors. However, this selection was never just about finding a capable partner. It was about finding my mate, the wolf the universe chose for me before either of us was born. And I have found her. A ripple of whispers spread through the hall. The competing she-wolves tried to maintain their composure, but Rosanna could see the disappointment and resignation in their faces. Rosanna Friedman, Cameron continued, gesturing toward her, is not what anyone expected. She's wolfless. She has no political connections. She wasn't raised in power or trained for leadership. By every traditional measure, she should be the least qualified candidate for Luna of the Royal Pack. Each word felt like a blow. Rosanna forced herself to keep breathing, to maintain her composure, even as every inadequacy was listed publicly. And yet, Cameron's voice softened. She possesses every quality I was searching for. Compassion that extends even to those who've hurt her. Intelligence that needs no formal education to shine. Courage that has nothing to do with physical strength and everything to do with choosing hope over despair. Kindness that costs her nothing, but gives her everything. She is in every way that matters the perfect Luna for this pack. He turned to face Rosanna directly. Will you accept? Will you stand beside me, not just as my mate, but as Luna of the Royal Pack? Will you help me lead with wisdom and compassion, and the kind of strength that transforms rather than dominates? The hall had gone absolutely silent. Every eye was on Rosanna, waiting for her answer. This was at the moment where she either stepped fully into this new identity or retreated back into the safety of invisibility. But invisibility was no longer safe. Had never been safe, had only been survival disguised as security. Rosanna stood, her legs shaking but holding. Yes, she said, letting her voice carry. I accept. The hall erupted. Some wolves cheered, mostly Royal Pack members who'd already accepted their alpha's choice. Others remained silent, processing this unprecedented turn of events. The competing she-wolves applauded politely, their disappointment evident, but their grace intact. Cameron closed the distance between them and took her hands. Then, by the authority vested in me as Alpha King of the Royal Pack and leader of the Northern Territories Council, I declare Rosanna Friedman my chosen mate and future Luna. The selection is concluded. He pulled something from his pocket, a ring. Not just any ring, but the Luna's ring passed down through generations of Royal Pack leaders. Silver worked into intricate knots that represented the interconnection of pack bonds, with a single blue stone at its center that seemed to glow with inner light. This ring has been worn by every Luna of the Royal Pack for 300 years, Cameron said, his voice pitched for her ears alone, even though everyone was watching. It represents duty, yes, but also belonging, also home. Also, the promise that you'll never face the world alone again. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her hand specifically. The moment it settled into place, Rosanna felt something shift. Not dramatically, not with the rush of transformation she'd always imagined a wolf shift would bring, but subtly, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed, the pack bond. She could feel them, hundreds of wolves, all connected through invisible threads of loyalty and family and shared purpose. The sensation was overwhelming and comforting at once, like being wrapped in a blanket made of collective consciousness. You feel it, Cameron said, wonder in his voice, the bond. Even without a wolf, you can feel it. How is that possible? Because bonds transcend physical form. Because you were always meant to be part of this pack. Even if you arrived through the most unexpected path imaginable, Cameron lifted her hand to his lips and kissed the ring. Welcome to the Royal Pack, Luna Rosanna. Luna Rosanna. The title felt foreign and familiar at once, like trying on a coat that had been tailored for someone else but somehow fit. Anyway, the ceremony continued with formal presentations. Each of the 30 competing she-wolves was acknowledged personally by Cameron, thanked for their participation, and given a gift of appreciation from the royal pack jewelry, or books, or other treasures appropriate to their demonstrated interests during the trials. It was a gesture of respect, a recognition that they'd competed with honor, even though they hadn't been chosen. When the last competitor had been acknowledged, the mood in the hall shifted from formal ceremony to celebration. Tables appeared laden with food and drink. Music began not the sophisticated symphony from the welcoming feast, but something livelier, more joyful. Wolves began mingling. The initial shock of Cameron's unprecedented choice, giving way to curiosity, and for some, genuine happiness. Rosanna found herself surrounded by royal pack members eager to meet their new Luna. Names and faces blurred together. Warriors and healers, craftspeople and scholars, wolves of all ages, and ranks wanting to welcome her, to express their support, to satisfy their curiosity about the wolfless girl their alpha had chosen. Through it all, Cameron remained at her side, not hovering protectively, but present, a steady anchor in the overwhelming chaos of acceptance. "Breathe," he'd murmured during a brief moment when they were relatively alone. "You're doing perfectly. I don't know half their names. I've forgotten most of what they've told me. I feel like I'm drowning in well-meaning attention. That's normal. No one expects you to remember everything immediately. They just want to see you, to welcome you, to understand why I chose you." Cameron's hand found hers and squeezed. "Give it time. Eventually, the faces will become familiar. The names will stick. The overwhelming newness will settle into comfortable routine. When however long it takes, there's no deadline for belonging." The celebration stretched into the night. Rosanna danced with Cameron awkwardly at first since she'd never been taught formal dancing. But he led with patient grace until she found the rhythm. She met visiting alphas who expressed congratulations with varying degrees of sincerity. She accepted blessings from royal pack elders who seemed genuinely pleased their alpha had found his mate. And through it all, she wore the Luna's ring and felt the pack bond, humming in the back of her consciousness, like a song she was only beginning to learn the words to. It was past midnight when the celebration finally began winding down. Visiting packs started departing, heading back to their territories, with stories about the most unusual selection in living memory. The Silver Crest delegation had left hours earlier, presumably before the ceremony began. Rosanna felt a pain at that, not regret exactly, but a complicated grief for a chapter of her life that had closed badly. Cameron walked her back to her suite, their suite now. Technically, though he'd made it clear, she could maintain separate quarters if she preferred. They stood outside the door, the hallway empty and quiet, after hours of overwhelming noise and attention. "How are you feeling?" Cameron asked. Honestly, Rosanna considered the question. Terrified, overwhelmed, grateful, confused, like I'm wearing someone else's life, and any moment they're going to realize the mistake and take it all back. That's not going to happen. You can't promise that. I can promise I won't let it happen. I can promise that every wolf who tries to question your worth will answer to me. I can promise that you're exactly where you're supposed to be, even if it feels impossible. Cameron's hand came up to cup her cheek. "I can promise that I see you, Rosanna. Fully, completely. And I choose you anyway, not despite your limitations, but because of everything you are, limitations included." Rosanna leaned into his touch, letting herself have this moment of vulnerability. "I don't know how to be a Luna. Don't know how to lead or inspire or command respect. I only know how to survive. Then we'll start there with survival. And slowly, when you're ready, we'll build the rest together." Cameron pressed his forehead to hers, the gesture intimate and grounding. "You're not alone anymore. Remember that whatever challenges come, whatever doubts surface, whatever fears try to convince you, you're not enough. You're not facing them alone. Thank you, Rosanna whispered, for seeing me, for choosing me, for believing I could be more than what I was told I was. Thank you for being brave enough to stay. They remained that way for a long moment. Foreheads pressed together, breathing synchronized, the pack bond thruming between them like a living thing. Then Cameron stepped back, giving her space. Rest, he said. Tomorrow begins your official training as Luna. It'll be intense, but Nadita and several others have volunteered to help. You won't be thrown into leadership unprepared. What about you? Where will you be dealing with the political fallout of choosing a wolfless mate from another pack? Several alphas have already requested meetings to discuss the implications of my decision. Cameron's expression turned wry. Apparently, I've set a dangerous precedent by valuing personal connection over political advantage. Have you? Absolutely. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat. He kissed her forehead gently. Good night, Luna. Rosanna. Welcome home. Then he was gone, leaving Rosanna alone in the hallway outside her suite. She entered the room, her space, her home, and closed the door behind her. The midnight blue dress came off carefully, folded and put away with a reverence it probably didn't require, but Rosanna couldn't help. The Luna's ring stayed on her finger, its weight unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. She stood at the window overlooking the gardens, watching the moon paint everything in silver light. Somewhere in those gardens, Patricia had torn her dress. Somewhere in this palace, Cameron had given her his cloak. Somewhere between those two moments, her entire life had transformed. The pack bond hummed in the back of her mind. Hundreds of wolves connected through invisible threads, all of them now linked to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. It should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like being held, like belonging. Rosanna climbed into bed, the too soft mattress, the too fine blankets, and let herself acknowledge the truth she'd been avoiding all day. She was happy, terrified, and overwhelmed, and completely out of her depth. Yes. But underneath all that complexity, running through it like a vein of gold through rock, was genuine happiness. The kind she'd stopped believing was possible. The kind that's formed everything it touched. Sleep came easily for the first time in years. No nightmares haunted her rest. No anxiety dreams about Patricia's punishments, or Douglas's indifference, or her own fundamental worthlessness. Instead, she dreamed of forests and mountains and golden eyes that saw everything and chose her anyway. She dreamed of home. Chapter 10, 6 months later. Spring arrived at the Royal Pack territory with an explosion of color that still took Rosanna's breath away. Cherry blossoms lined the paths through the palace gardens, their petals falling like pink snow. The mountains in the distance had shed their winter white for vibrant green. Everything felt alive, renewed, transformed, much like Rosanna herself. She stood at the window of the Luna's office, her office now, though she still sometimes had to remind herself of that fact, reviewing the afternoon schedule. A meeting with the PAX's Education Committee to discuss expanding literacy programs for younger wolves, a consultation with the healers about improving medical access for Omega families, a diplomatic dinner with representatives from 3 neighboring PACs who wanted to discuss trade agreements. 6 months ago, she'd been scrubbing floors and trying to be invisible. Now she was helping shape policy and forge alliances and lead a pack of over 500 wolves who looked to her for guidance. The transformation should have felt impossible. Some days it still did. You're frowning at that schedule like it personally offended you. Rosanna turned to find Cameron leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed and his expression amused. Even after 6 months of marriage, the sight of him still made her heart stutter. He'd shed his formal Alpha King attire for simple training clothes. He'd been in the Warriors' grounds all morning and somehow looked even more devastating than usual. I'm not frowning. I'm concentrating. You're definitely frowning. I can see the little crease between your eyebrows. Cameron crossed the room and pressed his thumb gently to the spot. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I just have 17 things to accomplish today, and only 12 hours to do them in. Then delegate. That's what the pack council is for. I could delegate, but then I'd worry I was shirking my responsibilities. And you'd find me at 3 late in the morning trying to catch up on everything I didn't personally handle. Rosanna leaned into his touch despite herself. I'm still learning to balance helping with controlling. It was an ongoing challenge knowing when to involve herself directly and when to trust the pack's various leaders and committees to handle matters without her input. Patricia had trained her to believe she had to do everything herself, or it wouldn't be done correctly. Unlearning that particular lesson was harder than learning the actual duties of being Luna. You're doing better than you think, Cameron said. Last month, you would have tried to personally oversee all 17 tasks. This month's, you're at least acknowledging that delegation is possible. By next month, you might even practice it. Your confidence in my progress is overwhelming. I prefer to think of it as realistic optimism. Cameron's hands settled on her waist, pulling her closer. You're being too hard on yourself again. I can tell. He could tell. After 6 months of marriage and the increasingly strong mate bond between them, Cameron could read her moods like he could read ancient pack texts with perfect comprehension and occasional frustration at her complexity. I had a letter from Celeste this morning, Rosanna admitted. That's what has me unsettled. Cameron's expression sharpened. What did she want? Nothing. Just an update on her life. Rosanna moved to her desk and retrieved the letter. She's been in isolation at the Silver Crest estate for 6 months as punishment for her elimination from the selection. Patricia's finally allowing her limited social privileges again, but she says it's been difficult. She asked if we might correspond regularly, if I might offer advice on how to handle her mother's expectations. The request had surprised Rosanna. She and Celeste had never been close, couldn't be close when their relationship was built on a foundation of servant and master. But something had shifted that night at the selection when Rosanna had protected Celeste from Patricia's immediate wrath. The apology Celeste had offered, the vulnerability she'd shown, maybe not friendship, but the possibility of connection. What did you tell her? Cameron asked carefully. I haven't responded yet. I wanted to think about it. Rosanna set the letter down. Part of me wants to help her. She's only 17 and Patricia's punishments are cruel, even by werewolf standards. But another part remembers all the years of casual cruelty. All the times she watched me suffer and did nothing. Both parts are valid. Cameron said, You don't owe Celeste anything. If corresponding with her will cause you pain or drag you back into Silvercrest politics, you're allowed to decline. But you're not someone who can ignore suffering when you see it. Even suffering of people who've hurt you. It's one of the things I love most about you. And also the thing that worries me most. Cameron's hand found hers. Whatever you decide, I'll support. Just make sure you're choosing because you want to help, not because you feel obligated. The distinction was important. Rosanna had spent so many years operating from obligation that distinguishing it from genuine desire still required conscious effort. I'll think about it more, she decided. Maybe draft a response and sit with it for a few days before sending. Sounds reasonable. Cameron glanced at the schedule on her desk. Speaking of things you need to think about, did you see the request from the Northern Territories Council for you to speak at their spring summit? Rosanna had seen it, had been actively avoiding thinking about it. They want me to talk about non-traditional leadership paths, about how wolfless wolves can contribute to pack society, about expanding definitions of what makes someone qualified to lead. Revolutionary topics, considering most alphas still believe wolf status is essential to proper hierarchy. Exactly, which means if I speak, I'll be challenging centuries of tradition and probably making enemies of every conservative alpha in the territories. Probably, Cameron agreed cheerfully. But you'll also be giving hope to every wolfless, omega, or otherwise marginalized pack member who's been told they don't matter. You'll be proving through your own existence that power structures can change, that merit matters more than birth status. Rosanna sank into her desk chair. No pressure then, none at all. Cameron crouched beside the chair so they were at eye level. But Rosanna, you don't have to carry the weight of representing all marginalized wolves. You're allowed to just be Luna of this pack without becoming a symbol for everyone else's struggles. But if I can help, then you should. When you're ready, when speaking about your experience will empower rather than drain you, but not because you feel obligated to be a voice for the voiceless. You're allowed to just exist, to be happy, to focus on your own life without feeling guilty about wolves you can't save. The words hit harder than they should have. Rosanna blinked against sudden tears. How do you always know exactly what I need to hear, mate Bond? Also, I pay attention. Cameron wiped away the tear that had escaped. 6 months ago, you could barely accept that you deserved basic respect. Now you're trying to save everyone while leading a pack and navigating diplomatic complexity. The growth is remarkable, but you're still healing from 17 years of trauma. Give yourself permission to take things slowly. A knock at the door interrupted whatever Rosanna might have said. Nadita entered carrying a leather portfolio and wearing an expression of barely suppressed excitement. Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. Nadita set the portfolio on Rosanna's desk and opened it to reveal architectural drawings. The builders finished the final designs for the community center you proposed. Look at this. Classrooms for literacy programs, a library open to all pack ranks, meeting spaces for omegas and lower-ranked wolves to organize. Even a nursery for working parents. It's everything you envisioned. Rosanna studied the drawings, her earlier melancholy transforming into something brighter. This project had been her idea, a space where pack members of all ranks could access education and resources without having to navigate the formal hierarchy of the main palace. A place where wolfless wolves, omegas, and anyone else who felt marginalized could find support and community. The council had approved the funding last month. Now it was becoming real. When can we break ground? Rosanna asked. Next week, if you approve the final plans. The builders estimate 6 months for construction, which means it could be operational by autumn. 6 months, half a year, the same amount of time Rosanna had been Luna, time that had felt simultaneously endless and impossibly fast. Approve them, Rosanna said. Let's make this happen. Nadita grinned. I'll let the builders know. Oh, and one more thing. There's a young wolf asking to speak with you. She came all the way from the Moonwater Pack, says it's personal and urgent. Did she say what it's about? Only that she heard about you, about a Luna who's wolfless, but still leads. She wants to meet you to know if the stories are true. Rosanna and Cameron exchanged glances. This had been happening more frequently over the past few months. Wolves from other packs seeking her out, wanting to meet the unprecedented Luna. Asking questions about how she navigated leadership without a wolf. Send her in, Rosanna decided. And Nita, thank you for everything. I couldn't do this without you. Please. You could absolutely do this without me. You'd just be significantly less organized and probably wouldn't eat regular meals. Nadita left with a wave, returning moments later with a girl who couldn't have been more than 16. The girl was small, thin, with dark hair and eyes that held too much weariness for someone so young. She clutched a worn traveling bag and looked around the Luna's office like she expected it to disappear. Luna Rosanna, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for seeing me. I'm Helen Ashley. The name was familiar, but Rosanna couldn't immediately place it. Cameron, however, straightened with recognition. You're the serving girl, he said gently. From the selection, the one Celeste almost struck, understanding clicked into place. This was the royal pack servant who'd been at the center of that first confrontation. The catalyst that had set everything else in motion. "I didn't realize you weren't royal pack," Rosanna said. "I thought I was hired temporarily for the selection. Extra help for the increased population. I'm actually from the Moonwater pack." But Helen's voice faltered. "I don't have a wolf. My pack tolerates me, but barely. When I heard about you, about a wolfless Luna, who leads one of the most powerful packs in the territories I had to know if it was true or just stories people were telling." Rosanna's heart ached with recognition. She saw herself in this girl, the weariness, the desperate hope, the bone-deep certainty that she didn't belong anywhere. "It's true," Rosanna said. "I'm wolfless. Always have been. Probably always will be. And I'm Luna of the royal pack. How?" Gila's eyes shone with unshed tears. "How is that possible? Everyone says you can't lead without a wolf, that the pack bond doesn't work, that you're weak and limited." "And then they're wrong," Cameron interrupted, his voice firm but kind. "The pack bond works perfectly. Rosanna feels it as strongly as any shifted wolf. And leadership has nothing to do with whether you can transform, and everything to do with whether you can see what your pack needs and help provide it." "But don't you feel inadequate?" Helen asked Rosanna directly. "Don't people question your authority? Don't you worry that you're not enough every single day?" Rosanna admitted some days more than others. "But here's what I've learned. Being enough isn't about having all the abilities everyone expects. It's about using the abilities you do have with integrity and compassion. It's about surrounding yourself with wolves who complement your weaknesses and amplify your strengths. It's about defining your own worth instead of accepting everyone else's definitions. That's easy to say when you're mated to the Alpha King," Helen said, then immediately looked horrified. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean apologize. You're right." Rosanna moved around the desk to sit in the chair beside Helen rather than behind the desk. "Equals not Luna and supplicant. I have advantages you don't. Protection, status, resources. My path isn't replicable for every wolfless wolf. But Helen, the fundamental truth remains. You're not worthless just because you can't shift. You're not broken or defective or less than. You're different, and different can be powerful if you let it. I don't feel powerful. I feel scared all the time. That's okay too. Scared and powerful aren't mutually exclusive." Rosanna took Helen's hand. "What do you need? Why did you really come here?" Helen took a shaky breath. "I want to stay at the royal pack. I know that's presumptuous, and I have no right to ask, but I can't go back to Moonwater. Can't spend the rest of my life being tolerated instead of accepted. I need somewhere I can just exist without constantly proving I deserve to." Cameron and Rosanna exchanged glances. An entire conversation happened in that look. Questions about precedent, concerns about other packs sending their wolfless members here, worries about the royal pack becoming a refuge that other alphas would resent, but also recognition that they had the power to help. That opening their territory to wolves like Helen was exactly the kind of leadership Rosanna had been talking about building. "We have a program," Cameron said slowly, "for wolves seeking asylum from other packs. It's not widely advertised, but it exists. If you can demonstrate that remaining in your pack puts you at risk, not physical danger necessarily, but systematic discrimination or emotional harm, we can petition Alpha of the Moonwater pack for your transfer. And if he refuses, then we have a different conversation. But most alphas are willing to release wolves who are actively seeking to leave. It resolves a problem without requiring them to change their pack culture." Cameron's tone made clear what he thought of alphas, who considered wolfless members a problem to be solved. Helen's expression transformed from desperate hope to cautious relief. "I could actually stay. You could?" Rosanna confirmed. "We'd have to process the formal paperwork, and you'd need to prove you can contribute to the pack work in some capacity." Develop skills that help the community. But yes, if you want to transfer to the Royal Pack, we'll support that request. Thank you. Helen's tears finally spilled over. Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means. But Rosanna did know. Knew exactly what it meant to be offered sanctuary after years of merely being tolerated. Knew the specific flavor of relief that came from someone saying, "You can stay without conditions or caveats." Nadita returned to escort Hela to the quarters where potential transfers stayed while their paperwork was processed. The girl left with something that looked like hope brightening her features. The same hope Rosanna had felt 6 months ago when Cameron had offered her a choice. "That's going to happen more," Cameron said once they were alone again. "Wolfless wolves from other packs hearing about you and seeking refuge here. We need to decide how we're going to handle it. Whether we can sustain becoming a sanctuary without angering every traditional alpha in the territories." "I know." Rosanna returned to her desk and the schedule that now seemed less overwhelming. But how can we turn them away? How can I have this life, this acceptance, this belonging, and deny it to others who need it just as desperately? We can't. Which means we're about to become very popular with marginalized wolves, and very unpopular with conservative packs. Cameron didn't sound particularly concerned about the latter. Good thing I've never cared much about being liked by alphas who value tradition over compassion. This is going to cause problems probably, but the right thing usually does. The afternoon unfolded with its scheduled chaos meetings and consultations and the endless small decisions that comprised leadership. But underneath the routine, Rosanna felt something shifting, a sense that they were building something larger than just their own happiness, that her presence as Luna was opening doors for wolves who'd been systematically shut out. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. That evening, after the last meeting had concluded, and the diplomats had been fed and entertained and sent on their way, Rosanna found herself back in the gardens where everything had begun. The cherry blossoms glowed in the twilight, and somewhere in these carefully maintained paths, her old life had ended, and her new one had begun. Cameron found her there, as she'd known he would. The mate bond made it almost impossible to stay apart for long. Not a compulsion exactly, but a pull, a desire to be near each other that went beyond simple attraction. "Long day," he asked, settling beside her on the stone bench. "Long but good, productive." Rosanna leaned against his shoulder. "I think I'm going to accept the Northern Territories Council's invitation to speak at the summit." Yeah, you were right. I don't have to be a symbol for everyone, but I can share my experience. Can maybe make things slightly easier for the next wolfless Omega who gets told they're not enough." She turned to look up at him. "And I'm going to write back to Celeste. Going to offer what support I can within boundaries that protect my own well-being, because holding on to resentment serves no one." Cameron's smile was proud and warm. "You've come so far in 6 months. "We've come far," Rosanna corrected. "None of this works without you, without the pack, without everyone who chose to see past what I'm not to what I actually am." "And what are you?" It was the same question he'd asked 6 months ago in a different context. Then she'd had no answer. "Now I'm Luna of the Royal Pack. I'm your mate. I'm wolfless and powerful anyway. I'm learning to lead and still making mistakes. I'm healing from trauma and helping others heal too. I'm all of it. Contradictions and complications, and still figuring out who I'm becoming." "That's perfect." Cameron said, "You're perfect. I'm really not perfect for me then. Perfect for this pack. Perfect for this exact moment in time where someone needed to challenge every assumption about what makes someone worthy of leading." He kissed her temple and your home. Most importantly, your home. The words still made her chest tight with emotion she couldn't quite name. 6 months ago, she'd had no home, no place where she belonged without conditions, no space where she could exist without constantly proving her right to be there. Now she had this gardens and a palace and a pack of over 500 wolves who looked to her for guidance. A mate who saw her completely and chose her anyway. A future that stretched ahead full of possibility instead of predetermined suffering. "I love you," she said. The words still feeling new, even though she'd said them hundreds of times over the past months. "Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me, for building this life with me. Thank you for being brave enough to stay, for choosing yourself when every instinct probably screamed at you to run." Cameron's arms wrapped around her, solid and safe. "I love you, too, more than I thought I could love anyone. You've transformed not just your own life, but this entire pack. We're better because you're here." They sat in the gardens as twilight deepened into true night, the cherry blossoms falling around them like pink snow, the palace glowing with warm light behind them. Somewhere in those halls, Helen was settling into quarters where she'd be accepted rather than merely tolerated. Somewhere in the territory, over 500 wolves were going about their lives, connected through bonds that included Rosanna. Now, somewhere beyond their borders, other wolfless wolves were hearing stories about Aluna, who'd proven that limitations didn't define worth. And here, in this moment, Rosanna let herself be completely happy. Let herself have this impossible fairy tale that had started with a torn dress and a royal cloak and a bond that defied every rule. The universe, it seemed, specialized in unexpected endings. In taking the girls, everyone dismissed and proving they'd been the heroines all along. Rosanna had spent 17 years invisible. Now she was seen, and that made all the difference. Epilogue. 1 year later, the community center opened on a brilliant autumn day when the leaves painted the royal pack territory in shades of gold and crimson. Rosanna stood before the gathered crowd, hundreds of pack members of all ranks, plus representatives from a dozen other territories who'd come to witness this unprecedented event. A building designed for everyone, where Omega wolves could access education, where wolfless members could find support, where the rigid hierarchies that had defined pack life for centuries could be questioned and reimagined. Cameron stood beside her as she cut the ceremonial ribbon, his pride evident in every line of his body. The crowd cheered royal pack members who'd embraced their unusual Luna. Wolves from other territories who saw hope in what she represented, and a growing number of transferred wolves who'd sought sanctuary here over the past year. Helen was among them, now fully integrated into the pack and training as a healer's assistant. Celeste had written that morning with congratulations and a tentative request to visit. She'd finally managed to gain enough independence from Patricia to consider traveling. Even Alicia had sent a brief note acknowledging the sense opening, though her pride probably wouldn't allow anything more generous. The past year had brought challenges Rosanna couldn't have anticipated. Political pushback from conservative alphas, complicated negotiations over transferred wolves, the constant pressure of being a symbol while trying to just be herself. But it had also brought growth hers, and the packs brought changes that rippled far beyond the royal pack territory. The northern territories were slowly, reluctantly beginning to acknowledge that maybe wolfless members weren't inherently less valuable. That maybe hierarchies based purely on shifting ability were limiting rather than logical. That maybe a Luna who'd spent her life on the margins could see problems and solutions others had missed. It wasn't revolution, not yet. But it was progress. That evening, after the celebrations had wound down and the visitors had departed, Rosanna found herself back in the library, her favorite sanctuary in the palace. She'd expanded it over the past year, adding sections specifically focused on resources for wolfless wolves, Omega leadership development, and challenging traditional pack hierarchies. Cameron found her there, as he always did. "Happy?" he asked, settling into the chair beside hers. Rosanna considered the question. A year ago, she would have been terrified to claim happiness, worried that acknowledging it would somehow cause the universe to snatch it away. Now, yes, she said simply, I'm happy. Good. Cameron took her hand, his thumb brushing over the Luna's ring she'd worn for a year now. Because you've earned it. Every moment of happiness, every success, every step forward. You've earned all of it. We've earned it, Rosanna corrected. This doesn't work without partnership. Without you supporting me when I'm drowning, without the pack choosing to follow. Even when I'm figuring things out, without everyone deciding that maybe the old ways aren't the only ways. True partnership, Cameron agreed. The kind the original Lunas and Alphas were supposed to have before hierarchy became more important than connection. They sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by books and the lingering scent of evening, blooming flowers from the gardens. Outside the royal pack territory hummed with life wolves in their various pursuits, the community center hosting its first evening programs, the constant flow of pack bonds connecting everyone in invisible threads, and at the center of it all, no longer invisible, no longer dismissed, no longer told she was too limited to matter. Rosanna Freridman, Luna of the Royal Pack, mate to the Alpha King, living proof that the universe sometimes chose the most unexpected heroines. She'd been told that girls like her didn't get fairy tale endings. She'd been told wrong. Dear viewers, as we reach the end of Rosanna's journey from invisible servant to Luna, I wonder, what does her story teach us about the limitations we accept for ourselves? Have you ever been told you weren't enough only to prove them wrong? Share your thoughts below, and if this story moved you, please consider